Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Sunday Conversations from IGT. I'm Justin K Prim, and I just want to thank everybody for being here. Looks like we got a lot of people from all over the world, as usual, but I think maybe today we have more Australians than we normally do. So we're at a special time today because we have a special guest with us who is in Australia, and we couldn't do it at our normal time because it's too late. So if you guys haven't joined us before, this is the Sunday Conversation series. This is the sixth one that we've done. So we've had 6 weeks of really interesting conversations so far. It's been a blast. I'm looking forward to doing today's and of course, all the upcoming ones as well. If you haven't been with us before and you haven't seen some of these talks, or maybe you just want to go back, maybe you missed one, these are all up on my YouTube channel, so you can find all of these. And if you miss part of today's, then you can find this one up there as well in the next couple of days. So that being said, I'd like to welcome our guest, Laura Phillis, coming all the way from Adelaide. So let me just invite her in. Lost my mouse here. Okay. So welcome, Laura. Whenever you come, we will be. Hi. Good morning.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Awesome. I can hear you loud and clear. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I think this is the earliest webinar that we've done so far. What time is it for you?
It's 11:30 a.m. here.
Okay, cool.
I've had a bit of a sleep in, which is good, and cleaned the house and everything before we started. So yeah, it's a good time of day for me.
Okay, just in case we start roaming around your house, everything's going to be clean. So, welcome to our Sunday Conversation series. We're super excited to have you. This is I think this is the first gem cutter that we've had on this show, or at least first dedicated cutter. We did have Sarah Steele. She was our first guest, but we weren't really talking about cutting. We were talking about jets. So this will be the first time we've had a good opportunity to really dive into the nerdier side of all things cutting. So
let's get nerdy.
Before we get too nerdy, maybe for anybody who doesn't know you, can you just give us a really brief summary of who you are and where you are and how you got to this point on our show today?
Sure. So I hadn't really thought about how to introduce myself. So I'm based in Adelaide, South Australia. I'm a gem cutter. I'm a professionally trained gem cutter. I've been cutting for just over 6 years. I was trained by Scott Langford, who was a master cutter here in South Australia. And I worked with him for about 4.5 years while doing my own cutting on the side. And I then branched off and went full-time into my own business. And I've had my business for about 4 years of that time. So I was trained doing a lot of repair cutting, custom cutting, those sorts of things. And I guess that sparked my interest in weird and wonderful cuts. And I don't like calibrated cuts. I don't like ovals, things like that. I like to kind of cut the more unusual, bespoke type pieces. So, and I'm also a graduated gemologist, and I teach gemology and things like that for the Gemological Association of Australia, if we want to go into that side of things too. So
you're a little bit on both sides: gemology, cutting, teaching.
Yeah.
Social media queen.
all things.
Good. Well, we're excited to talk about all these things. So we wanted to kind of talk today about cutting, right? I mean, cutting design. So approaching cutting in a unique way, because for anyone who's seen your work, we know that you have a funky style, a very unique way of approaching the cuts. That's not, as you said, it's not the calibrated style. It's not just round brilliance or mixed cut ovals or whatever. It's a little bit more quirky, interesting, different stuff. So why don't we just jump right into that, and let's talk a little bit about how do you approach the stone, like when you have your new stone and you're going to cut it. what's your idea behind this?
Um, I mean, I guess for me, I look at a piece of rough and I kind of see a shape. So, and now when I do buying, when I buy rough, I seek out those weirder shapes that kind of already speak a design to me. Um, you get, depending on the crystal and the gem that you're using, you get elongated crystals, prismatic crystals that, emerald, tourmaline, things like that, that kind of limit you to rectangles and emerald cuts and things like that. But I like looking for shapes that are maybe a broken crystal, maybe they've got a splotch of color in one end, something that's a bit different that kind of lets me go loose with creativity, I guess. So, and lately I've been doing on my social media, I've been doing a lot of Transformation Tuesdays, which have been really popular, and it's fun for me as well. I mean, this is how I approach a lot of my cutting, but it's been fun to share, I guess, what the rough looked like beforehand,
Yeah.
and then show people why it turned out the way it turned out. So, and yeah, it depends on the shape and also the coloring of the gemstone as to, I guess, why I look for things that way. But I guess also if you wanted to get methodical about it, I guess it can also save more weight of the rough too. So if you're looking at like we said, an elongated tourmaline crystal, for example, and a lot of cutting houses might cut an oval from that, that's great because calibrated ovals might sell. People want ovals in jewelry, you can have custom made, cast made jewelry settings for shapes like that. But it wastes a lot more rough. So you're wasting material that you can't really use otherwise. And a lot of people ask, well, what do you do with the offcuts, things like that. But as we both know as cutters, there aren't often offcuts.
Yeah.
It's just sludge that's ground off on a grinding wheel. So I do it partly, I guess, to save weight. But I just like letting my creativity run loose with it a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of giving you a bit of a signature style as well. I mean, when we look at your Instagram feed or your website, you definitely have a certain approach. Whether it's sort of the geometrical stuff, or I've also noticed and appreciated you do a lot of rose cuts. How'd you
Yeah.
how'd you get into the idea of doing rose cuts? Because that's a little bit unusual right now.
Is it? I
Well,
mean,
I mean, maybe in the
I've
last
been
couple
doing
of
them
years.
I've been doing them for a little bit. And again, they kind of look, I'll cut what people want me to cut, I guess. Like I'll go where the trend takes me. And I cut a couple. I did a batch of sapphire rose cuts maybe a few years ago. I did like an Instagram special where I sold, a small batch of them. And you've got to remember, like I work for myself. I do all my own cutting, or sorry, I do most of my own cutting, but a lot of the faceting and stuff, like I'm only one person. I'm not a cutting factory cutting multiples and batches and things like that. And I don't like to cut multiples of the same shape or design or things like that either, because one, for me, it's monotonous, and two, it doesn't make it unique and special anymore either if there's 50 of the same thing out there.
Mm-hmm.
So the rose cuts, I cut a small batch of 6 and they sold out in minutes. Like I'm talking like 2 minutes, they were gone.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, well, all right, I'll do some more of these. Like there's a bit of a demand for it. And I've mostly done batches of Australian sapphire rose cuts or opal rose cuts. I know no one else is doing like opal rose cuts. It is a bit different. But for those Instagram specials, I stick to rounds mostly because they're quick to repeat. They're easy to do. They've always got the same angles to repeat.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to doing like freeform rose cuts, from a professional opinion, like from a professional standpoint, or what's the word?
Like for efficiency, right?
Like, sorry.
I mean, you're talking about like the efficiency. It's a
Well,
lot of
no,
work,
but I guess like, people see a lot of like polky cut rose cuts out there that have been cut maybe by jam peg and things like that. So having a masked machine and doing it in a really methodical way, it's a lot harder to do. It takes a lot of concentration and calculations of angles and things like that. So, I mean, there's 24 facets or something on a rose cut typically. It's 2 rows of 6 and a row of 12. Sorry, that's 24. Sorry, 24 facets on a rose cut. And sometimes I'm doing, on like a freeform rose cut, I'm doing up to like 10 different angle changes. So on a round, there's only about 3 angle changes, and it's much quicker to do.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy doing the rose cuts. They've been quite popular because diamond rose cuts, I suppose, were trending, and more people are trying to come to the coloured gemstone, coloured gemstone life. But also, I guess when you, and this isn't necessarily why I do it, but there's another way you can look at it, again, of salvaging rough. So not all rough is deep enough to cut, fully faceted stone with a pavilion and a crown. So I'll only cut rose cuts if the rough is suitable for it. If they're already a shallow piece, if they can't be used for anything else, I'll cut a rose cut. But that goes both ways. A lot of people now want rose cuts, and I don't have the suitable rough. It's not the rough that a lot of rough dealers want to sell, because it's chips, it's shards, it's not useful to them, because I guess the industry isn't used to a lot of rose cut coloured stones. So it's harder for me to source that kind of rough. Usually they're the dregs in a parcel kind of thing. They're the gems that buyers put in the parcel to just get them sold. No one's really selling parcels of just that type of material. So I'll only cut rose cuts if the rough allows it, basically. Otherwise, again, there's just too much wastage in the material. So
okay. And so now whenever you're buying rough, like let's say for instance in this past Tucson where we saw each other, were you actually looking now for flat pieces to do rose cuts with, so that you have some of that
yeah,
material?
I was, but it depends on the material as well. So I mean, sapphire rose cuts I sell very well, partly because of the colors you can get them in, maybe, but also I guess with their hardness. Things like garnet rose cuts, I've cut a few garnets. They don't sell as quickly. And other semi-precious stones and things like that. I mean, one, they're cheaper. For me to sell, they're cheaper. But I guess from a durability standpoint, people maybe aren't as interested in the more semi-precious stones either. So, and opals especially are a bit of a tricky one to do rose cuts on. And often I'll buy cabochons that have already been cut, or preformed stones, because I can then see the play of colour they're going to have, hopefully, in the finished stone. Whereas when you're cutting a piece of opal, I mean, the reason if you've ever done a lot of opal cutting, the reason why we cabochon them mostly is because they can have like these colour bars, and these colour bars could be really thin just on the surface. So the cabochon could be really flat with just a beveled edge, or maybe there's a really thick colour bar and it's from all angles, and they'll cut a bigger domed cabochon. So with rose cuts, it's always a bit of a gamble rose cutting opals, because when you cut that angle, you don't know how much of that play of colour you potentially just cut out and lost, and it could just be potch underneath. So I try and buy cabochons or preformed stones for those, because I then sort of roughly know what I might get in a finished faceted stone. So they're another tricky one to manage. But yeah, I do try and find thin pieces that maybe are the pieces other people don't want when they're buying rough, because I know that I can cut them and utilize.
You're like a rough seller's dream, because you're trying to pick all the extra pieces out that are left over. But
sometimes I'm a dream, sometimes I'm a nightmare. I'm a scavenger, and a dealer will come to me going, "Oh, you want tourmalines? Like, I'll sell you tourmalines." I'm like, I'm going to pick through, and I'm going to be so fussy, because I want, like I said, I want quirky shapes, I want quirky colors. So I don't want just a parcel of maybe repeatable colors and sizes like other cutters might want. I want to pick through, and I want this one because this one speaks to me, and this one's got a cool shape I could already see design with. And so I'm very fussy in the way that I buy rough, and that also makes it hard for me to buy rough because I'm fussy.
Well, maybe let's show a couple photos, just so people can get an idea about what we're speaking about in terms of looking at the rough and getting the shape out of it. So I have a few photos from your portfolio or whatever. Let me just pull those up real quick, and we can do a little show and tell. So this would be exactly the kind of example you were just speaking about, right? Like finding a really quirky shape that you're going to make a quirky cut out of, right?
Yeah. And this one was a really unique stone, again, like I said, for color. So this is I should have maybe put labels on what these stones were, but I'll talk about each of them. So this is actually a zircon from Australia, and I've seen very few bicolor zircons like this. So it had this pink side and this yellow side to it.
You can see the line right in the middle.
yeah, and I mean, cutting anything bicolor, especially in a brilliant fastening pattern, which I chose for this one, it's going to mix those colors. So I can't predict anything about how I cut, about how it could look when it's finished. And that's part of the excitement of cutting for me as well, not knowing, not being able to predict what it's going to turn out like. You know, I could imagine one thing and it could turn out completely different. So this one was really nice that it was a mostly yellow stone, but it had pink flashes to it because it's reflecting that pink color at different sides of the finished gem because of refraction and things like that. So that was a really fun one to be able to show before and after, because if you'd only seen the after stone, you may not have appreciated the rough and how unusual that is, or you might not have realized that there was a bit of pink to it either. So that was cool.
Yeah, because maybe in the finished stone, if you don't look closely, you just see it as whatever color it looks, but you don't really look close enough to notice that there actually is two different colors.
Exactly, yeah.
And then I know you do a lot of party color sapphires. So tell us a bit about that process. How do you even approach something that has such a complicated color arrangement?
Um, I guess I guess the same way as I approach anything else. And like I said with the zircon, I've given up trying to predict the color that it might turn out. I mean, this is a really good example here. This was probably one of my most popular sought after gems, and again, there's only one of them. And this was the weirdest piece of rough, and I saw it and I was like, I want that challenge. It was this long, skinny, and it was quite deep as well, but it was this long, skinny shape. And I mean, that really only leads itself to maybe a marquee, I was thinking when I originally bought it. And I sat on it for probably 6 months going, how am I going to tackle this? I don't know what shape yet. I don't know how to best do this. And I just picked it up one day and I was like, yeah, I know. I've worked it out now. I'm going to cut like this. I'm just going to follow the shape. I'm going to preform it a bit. And when I do these sort of quirky shapes, I actually don't usually preform them at all, because I like to sort of follow the natural, the natural shape. So once I've dopped it up, typically I'll just grind flat surfaces around them as I go to sort of, and I'll keep doing that until I've got a clean girdle, if that makes sense. So very rarely I'll actually preform them like I did with this one, because I feel like it can waste more rough than you might mean it to. But because this was a roundish shape, it had to be symmetrical. Obviously, it had to have a nice domed end and a smooth point at the other end as well. I did preform this one, and it's also then good to sort of get a bit of an idea, I guess, about that color once you've smoothed that flat top surface. But this one also had, and you know, this had a nice veil running right through the center, which in the natural rough you might not have been able to see either. So that's another thing when that I want to mention when I'm doing these quirky cuts or these before and afters, or how I approach any cutting, is that it's not just about going with the natural shape. It's also, you know, you might have to cut out inclusions, which could give you a different sort of starting canvas. Again, you asked about color with this one as well. So it also depends how you want to orientate your color. So Australian sapphire, which is something I cut a lot of, they've got a lot of these party colors. They've got a different color down different crystal axes. They might have blue down one down one axis and green down the other. So that's the other challenge, or the fun challenge of orientating to get the color that you want as well. So you might want fully green, or you might want completely blue, or you might want party in the middle, where you want to sort of cut across both those axes, and then you don't know what color saturation it's going to turn out. And this really cool piece had color zoning as well. So again, I had no idea how it was going to turn out, because it had the dark blue up the more rounder end, and it did have a little bit of blue down the point. It was good that it had the light through the middle, so that, you know, that lighter color is through the keel or the culet, which would help lighten up the stone. But typically in I guess in an elongated shape, it's going to reflect color from one end to the other. So this having the dark end down the rounder end, it was going to reflect blue down the pointed end anyway. And you'll see this in a lot of pear shapes and marquees, or even emerald cuts, anything that has a keel with multiple colors, it will reflect color differently to how you expect anyway.
And this one's cool in the three photos because you can see from the rough, you already get a sense of where the yellow, where the blue is. And then once you preformed it, it's really, really clear. But then once you actually
Mm,
get into the faceted stone, you can start to see in the middle of the stone how the pattern of reflection is actually mixing the colors and making green in the middle where there wasn't a green middle
exactly.
in the preform.
Exactly. And that's a really good point because, again, people, I'm sure you get this as a cutter, people will request, like often they'll request a party sapphire with blue, green, and a bit of yellow. And that's near impossible because go back to art school, which, I mean, I was never good in art school, but primary colors, yellow and blue mix to make green. And when you're talking about refractive angles and brilliant cuts especially will mix these colors together, you'll very rarely keep that yellow.
Yeah.
I think I've seen in some African sapphires, sometimes there's maybe a patch of yellow as well as blue that maybe haven't mixed, but I think it's also, of those stones that I've seen like that, they're also windowed. They're not cut to refract light properly.
Okay.
So maybe that's partially why it keeps that color separation. I'm not sure.
And one of the viewers had asked, why didn't you choose to rotate a little bit and put the yellow into the quillet to like bring out more of the yellow color? Is that just based on shape
Um,
or just your own idea of what you liked for zoning?
um, there wasn't that much yellow to it. Like, it also depends on, I mean, we're only seeing where I've chosen to face, like front face this, right? So it also depends on the pavilion. There might have been a really big divot in one side, and typically I wanted to keep more of that blue in there than the yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Because that yellow has turned to a yellowish green.
Yeah.
Blue is a more prized color, I suppose, and I was maybe expecting like a greenish teal in some areas, which it sort of did have. Again, it's really hard because these
Yeah.
are,
I kind of see it
just
right
front facing
there.
photos. But also for me to orientate that yellow more in the center, I would have lost size on that some more. And yeah, I was orientating around color and around the shape on the underside as well. So, and knowing that it had that big veil running through the middle, I didn't, apart from the cool shape and the intrigue of what the color would look like, I didn't think it was going to be as popular of a stone because it had a big veil going across the center of the stone. But it's been one of my most popular stones. So I think
It's a good
because of
choice.
the journey that I've shared of it and the unusual color and how it's turned out. So
Yeah. And so, and I've got another picture of a different party color, this one. And here we can
mhm.
kind of see what you were saying. When you cut it in a different kind of a cut, the stripes on this one really, they don't really go away. It's very clear that there's still a striping pattern because of the step cut, right?
Yeah, correct. So, and that's right. When we want to manipulate color to our advantage, it comes down to a lot of factors. It comes down to the shape, so the external shape, and also the cutting design you're putting on the shape. So an elongated shape, as I mentioned before, will always reflect, in this example, the darker colors on the left end. Again, this was a really hard stone to photograph finished, but it has actually reflected some of that dark color on the right-hand side as well. So that's always going to happen in an elongated shape if there's darker color or a different color at one end. But also I've gone the step cut on this to accentuate color graduation and the zoning or banding in this sapphire as well. If I'd cut this in a brilliant design, like a brilliant fastening design, it probably would have had a different result. It would have blended those lines a bit better, but it probably would have been a bit of a mix of all weird colors, I think.
Yeah.
So for things like this is a very typical Australian dogtooth kind of crystal of sapphire, which has this this zoning down it. I wanted to keep it as a step cut to sort of show that,
Yeah.
I guess, like birthmark to where it is and where it's from.
Do you find that for stones like this, do people really like this banded look, or you have to find a pretty quirky customer to appreciate it?
I think it still comes down to color. I mean, this one sold fairly well, and they loved it. But I think this green and yellow isn't always a popular color. If that was, blue and green with stripy zoning and banding, and I've sold some like that before as well, definitely they are quirky because, and I don't know if it sells to it could sell to anyone. It could sell to a collector that just appreciates that beauty. It could sell to a gemologist like yourself or myself that understands why it's like that and why it looks that way, and it's just fascinating. Or it could sell to just someone off the street that just goes, I just love that color. I just love the way it looks. I don't understand it, but I just love it. So, but yeah, I think someone said they're feeling green and yellow at the moment. I think it just depends on the color as well. But typically, and look, everything that I cut, everything that I sell is things that I like, things that I'm obsessed with. So I do like bicolor stones. I do like quirky color zoning, not so much inclusions in things, but anything that's got a bit of character. I like specializing in that, and that's what I sort of search for to sell. So I guess anyone coming to me also shares that love for those things, or
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. I had a customer last year that sent me a parcel of stones exactly like this in the rough from Australia, but they really wanted to accentuate this banding pattern. Like every one that they sent me was banded in some way. And a lot of mine came out exactly the way that yours did. You know, I just pretty much gave them sort of emerald cut style things because it made sense
Yeah,
to, you know, because like you said, if you do the brilliant cut on this, I think it probably ends up looking a bit messy, right? Like it doesn't seem like it's going to do something
yeah.
good.
I've never tried it, to be honest, but I don't know if I'd want to.
Yeah. I mean, I just can't imagine.
Because there's not a lot like this either. I mean, again, I mentioned it's a dogtooth crystal, and often when you get a crystal like that, like down that optic axis, I don't think it was on this one, but often it's blue down that other direction and it's green this way. But it's not really that common to find crystals with banding. So if your customer had a whole collection of them, that's awesome. They don't come out like this all the time. So I think it is nice to sort of pay homage to that. I don't know if any other sapphires from other localities have it as distinctly as this.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think really Sri Lanka do. Madagascar, some of them maybe, but not quite like this.
I've never seen ones where it's
Tanzania,
such a strong
more,
yellow and blue or green, obvious stripe.
yeah,
So
yeah.
something interesting, something different. Somebody had asked, in your opinion, what's the difference between, you know, like party, teal, mermaid, peacock, all these sort of different color marketing terms? Some of these I actually haven't heard of, so maybe you'll enlighten me. But what do you think?
What are they asking? Like, what color I think is correct, or what I think? I mean, look, people can use whatever they want to market stuff, whatever works, whatever sells. You know, what I might call mermaid, you might call teal. Like it's potato kind of thing. Like I think, you know, diamonds especially have had these sneaky marketing terms as well. You know, we think of brown diamonds. Well, brown's not an attractive color, so we call them chocolate diamonds. And people like chocolate, it sounds more alluring. So I guess that's maybe where people have gone with the direction of mermaid colors, oceany colors, or, you know, and I guess I sometimes use those descriptive words if it makes me think of oceany colors. I don't know if I've used mermaid colors, but
But
it depends on your audience perhaps. But these are trending words, these are trending themes. You know, like mermaids and unicorns and things are popular at the moment, I guess.
yeah,
So I guess it just depends on the audience that you're using these words to, if that resonates with them, perhaps. Is
yeah.
that maybe what
Yeah,
you're asking?
I think that makes sense. But party color doesn't really fall into that. I mean, party color is a specific thing. It means there's more than one color. Like when we look back at this one, there's obviously
Correct.
multiple colors.
Yeah.
Though,
And party color, that's right. Party color means, it's short for the word partition. So a partition of different colors. It's interesting. I've seen debates on this topic about party and bicolor as well. To me, party is more used on Australian sapphires, but it can be, you know, party of blue-green, party of green-yellow. Green-yellow is that other one with the banding. That's still technically a party color. It's still a partition of different colors in the one stone. Then you've got things like bicolor, which we use that term more for tourmaline or ametrine or things like that. We wouldn't use the word party color for those, I suppose.
yeah,
So
it's kind of interesting. Like you wouldn't have a party color tourmaline necessarily.
yeah,
I mean,
which
you
is
could.
strange because you technically could. There could be a partition of different colors if you cut it in a brilliant cut.
Or
but
even
we'd call it bicolor.
like a watermelon tourmaline. I mean, why wouldn't that also be party color? There's not really a hard rule. It's just whatever people
Mm,
say.
yeah,
I guess people just
yeah.
like,
It's just certain terms we use for certain gemstone families, I guess.
yeah. Okay, well, we'll take the photos off for now, and maybe we'll come back to the some photos later. But somebody had
Mhm.
asked a question, which was exactly where I was about to go with our talk anyway. Um, so whenever you have your rough stone, do you use designs, or do you work it out on the fly, or do you maybe do a drawing or something first? How do you get from the rough in your head into that finished pattern that you're going to use?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because, again, I'm perhaps a little bit different to other people. Again, I was professionally trained with cutting, so a lot of the stuff we had to do in repair work is kind of on the fly. So if we were repolishing an oval, brilliant, and maybe that oval was originally native cut overseas, and maybe it had 10 main facets instead of 8, or it had 6 main facets instead of 8. Some of them, there's some really weird things out there. You know, I had to work it out on the fly and line up those facets with my index gear. And I had to just carefully work out what angles, and like I used to think of repolishing, it's like retracing, you know, you're tracing over someone else's cutting work. So I learned in my professional training, I learned a lot of adaptability, which I liked. You know, I enjoyed that challenge, that creative challenge. And so I guess I approach designing and cutting a design in that same way. When I first began, I used the Vargas books. I liked their some of the cutting designs in there, but I really haven't picked up a book or copied another person's design in years. I don't know. I don't like rules. You know, I like looking at a piece of rough, and I'm exploring my creativity as much as people want me to continue exploring as well, I guess. So I look at a piece of rough and I just make it up on the fly. I don't always write it down either. I certainly don't draw it out. I've never used GemCAD or software to help with that stuff. I wasn't taught that way. I'd like to look into it to understand it better moving forward as a cutter, but I don't think it's something I'd use in my process. So yeah, typically I'd look at a piece of rough. As I mentioned before, I would work out the girdle first, the external shape of what I'm going to work with. And then often, and I don't know what other photos you might have used in your PowerPoint, we might get to a bit later, but often if I'm doing a really quirky design that I want to sit down and really think about and put unusual facets on, often I'll put my main angle in, and then I'll draw the other facets on my pencil. So that's my version of GemCAD. I'll draw things on with a pencil and work out, you know, do I want triangular shapes? Do I want parallel shapes here? You know, like step faceting. And then as I go with, you know, then I'll work out the angles that I want to cut them in at. And again, it's like tracing to me. It's tracing down to get to match the degree of angle that I'd drawn on with that pencil, and to work out the index and the angle. And I guess stones like that, where I go, you know, where I spend a bit longer and I make up a really unusual, unique design that I'm only going to cut once, I might write those down really just to remember the indexes, the indexes as I'm going through the different stages of cutting, pre-polish and polish. I don't really document it with a diagram of what it ended up looking like and giving it a title and things like that. I did years ago, but I cut so many gems in a day, in a week, in a month, that I don't sit down and document every stone design I've ever cut. So, occasionally people ask me, oh, I want a stone cut in the same design as you did there. Well, I didn't write it down. I can cut something similar, but everything I cut is a bit different from the last one, I guess. So yeah, a lot of my cutting is on the fly. And I like it that way, I guess. Like I said, I don't copy designs. I don't cut other people's. I mean, there's some really good, I think it's the Gemology Project online has some amazing cuts and things like that.
Yeah.
And years ago when I had time, I don't have time anymore. When I had time, I'd maybe look through there and go, oh, I like this aspect of that cut, or I like how they've thought about doing little facets this way. And I might sort of try and map out, I don't look at their indexes and angles, but I sort of try and map out on my own stone how I could calculate to get facets like that, and maybe sort of chop and change from different people's cuts to work out how to make it look like that. So I guess I draw a bit of inspiration from things like that, but I don't really read faceting design diagrams or anything like that to get my cuts. No.
Okay, good answer. So we just had two of the exact same question, which is asking about your machine. So why don't we bring your phone in at this point so you can show us
Sure.
the machine that you use.
Sure.
We can surprise everybody with something they never saw before. So
all right,
we're going to bring in Laura's phone just so she can have some tactile movement and show us some different stuff that she's sitting at her work studio right now, so she can show us what she's looking at here. So if you were using diagrams, basically we would be looking from the diagram's point of view at you right now.
How do I?
And if just flip your phone, flip your camera.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I can't get the camera back up to do that at the moment. Oh, here we go. Okay, cool. So, yeah, so this is my Gem Master, which is an Australian brand. And it's kind of been...
So it looks like a masked machine at first. Or I mean, it is a masked machine, but there's a secret. There's a secret.
There's a secret, and I noticed that Chris is in the chat actually, and we were chatting on Facebook about this the other day. So actually, this is my quill or my handpiece that I use with the index, and it slots onto the mast here, I guess. This is really hard doing one-handed, sorry guys. And it's currently set at 90 degrees for doing girdles. But so when we were chatting the other day, and I didn't realize until recently that this isn't how all fastening machines are, this is all I've ever learned on and all I've ever used a Gem Master machine. So it makes the most sense to me that you can remove the quill and look at your stone. So I'm not going to get a neck ache when I'm doing girdles because I can, pick it up, look at it with the light, and again, sorry, one-handed here, and reattach it and carry on as I was. So it doesn't lock in. It's still on a mast like normal, but I guess the Ultratech and Fastron or the American brands don't have this.
I know you posted that really cool video a couple of months ago of you cutting, and in the middle of the video you pulled the quill off, and I was just like, whoa, what did she just do? Like, and then I remember when we were in Tucson, we did that video with Marie and Simon, and I don't know, like in your mind, the terminology between handpiece and mast is all mixed up because for you have both. You're like the only person, or whoever uses this machine, you have both. Yeah. You have a mast that comes off. So this is really interesting.
Well, and so Gem Master is a pretty big, one of the main gem fastening machine brands in Australia. So there's a few others. I think there's VJ Machines and some others I'm not really sure, but Gem Master, I mean, they were produced in South Australia, which is where I'm from, but even people up on the gem fields in Queensland use Gem Master machines. They're just, they are the main machine in Australia. So, and I've, my former boss had a couple of different Gem Masters, so I've worked on about 3 of his. This is the 4th one I've used. This is now what I'm used to. I wouldn't go to another machine because I'm just used to the way this one works, but also now finding out that it's weird that I can remove the quill, or the handpiece. I don't think I'd ever change machines because it sounds like I've got the best of both worlds with it. So it's just, it's what I've known, and I just couldn't imagine not being able to remove that, because when you're checking and for how much I'm cutting in a day or how much I'm checking a stone as I cut it as well, that would just give you such a backache or a neck ache. I just couldn't imagine it. So I think, and I guess is that why you went to a handpiece?
Yeah.
like a tang.
I know a lot of people who use the mast machine, you know, basically you have your light set up in a certain way. So then when you flip up your mast, it's kind of always in that same spot. And then for me, when I used to use a
Mm,
mast, I used to have my visor here. So it was already in,
yeah,
I'd flip up the stone and it was already in the right spot to magnify that. You know, you kind of, but you can't
yeah.
move, right?
Well,
You can't move
yeah.
away from the desk in that way because it's fixed. Whereas the
Mm,
handpiece is just like wherever you want to move, or you know, if you need to get different in the
yeah.
light, it's no big deal. And for me, that was
Yeah.
faster.
Well, and it's the same, I guess. Like I'll position the light where I want it, but when I'm doing a girdle at this position, there's no way I'm going to be, lowering or raising my seat and crouching my neck and cranking my neck to flash that facet for my face to see it. No matter where I position the light, I need to have that stone comfortably at eye height. Otherwise, it's just not good for your neck and back.
Yeah, it's true. Chris had asked, do you have to make sure that you put it back in the right? Does it only go back on one way, or can you put it back on like so that let's say 96 is suddenly now on 24 or something? You know what I mean? Like can it twist?
So, okay, so I'll run through this. So currently I've just got it clamped back so I can rotate it, so that it's easier with one hand. So this little, again, I have no idea how the American ones work, so I'm just going to show you how this one works, and I hope this is in focus for you guys.
Yeah.
So currently I've got it pegged onto 96. I can move this around to the different positions as I want, things like that. And when I go to take it off, I can do whatever I want. I can rotate this around, but it still works that I'm using this little thing to peg in the tooth number that I want.
So I guess it doesn't.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't matter which way you put it back on because the index is coming off with it, so it can't be upside down or anything.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So yeah, I guess because again, I don't know how the American ones work, but yeah, the index gear is attached to this quill that comes off, so I can still then re-put it on wherever I want my index to be.
And so
and then I guess as well for doing girdles, for rounding, like when I do round rose cuts, for example, I just clamp it at the back here so that this tooth thing is up, and I can just roll this. So I can roll a girdle nicely on a round stone on the edge of my lap. Okay. And then I just unclamp it and it goes back in the index that I want it to be in.
Yeah, that feature is normal. Pretty much everybody has that one, but nobody else is pulling their index. And you can change the index gear, right? When you pull the quill off, you can take the index gear off if you wanted to change it to like an 80 or a different number index gear.
Yeah, you can. I mean, to be honest, I very rarely change them, but it's just got, like a screw on the underside and an Allen key and things like that to remove the index wheel. Yeah.
Cool.
But I don't really change them often. I stick with a 96 fairly much all the time. Sometimes, I used to use a 64 and a 96, but really 96, you can do pretty much the same stuff as a 64. So I've got two of these anyway. They're both with 96. If I want to do, matched pairs and things, it's easy to have two of the. Well, and this is the other thing, I guess. This is the other advantage with a removable quill, is that I can cut multiple stones. I can cut a matched pair at the same time and get the dimensions exactly right because I'm just swapping between different quills on the mast.
Yeah.
So, and if I wanted to have a third one of these, I could have an 80 index or something like that. But I didn't realize all these extra advantages that I have because I didn't realize other cutters struggle with this. Like, it just makes the most sense to me. It's what I've always known. Well, it makes a little sense for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. And for us using the handpiece, it's the same. Like I have two handpieces if I want to do two, two stones at the same time. Or maybe I'm just doing two different projects and I'm bouncing back and forth. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's true. But yeah, and I also noticed you don't really have any high-tech gadgets on yours. You don't have anything digital. There's no depth gauge. It's just your angle, right? So it's
correct.
Pretty much, this could be like a machine from the 1960s. Basically, you have a cheater. That's the most sophisticated part.
Yeah, and they basically are. So this machine, I recently had upgraded, but this machine was probably from the 70s.
Okay.
They've made more recent models, but so this tray was from my original machine, which was 70 years. Sorry, not 70 years old. It was from the 70s, and I had a guy in Sydney who he's a gem cutter, a diamond cutter. I learned diamond cutting with him. He manufactures a lot of machines and rebuilds them. His name's Anthony Fitzgerald. Some people might have known of him anyway.
Yeah.
My old machine had the motor underneath the base with brushes, and really the only thing that went wrong in these machines is the brushes needed replacing every so often because they'd wear out in the motor. So, and it was very noisy. So he's done a full upgrade on this. He built a new base for it. It's wider, it's deeper. He's built a new slide plate for it. This is still my old mast and things and handpiece. And then he's attached this motor on the back. This is why my machine looks like a bit of a Franken machine with different colors. He's put this brushless motor on the back. It's a lot quieter, it's a lot faster, it's going to last a lot longer. And he's basically built this up to the equivalent of the modern version of the Gem Master, which I think is the GF4 or a GF5 or something like that. But I'm pretty sure that all Gem Master machines still have this same setup. They never went to the digital gauge or anything like that. So again, this is what I'm used to. I'm happy with this. I think a digital gauge, I'd probably be too worried about the flex in, when I'm putting pressure on the wheel and stuff like that. But the way I polish, like I do put pressure on if I need it to polish faster, if I want it to just cut a little bit higher or lower. Again, you've just got your up and down here, you've got your index, and you've got your cheater and stuff on the front.
I was just going to ask if you have a fine adjustment to go up and down. I didn't see that little knob. So
yeah, which I mostly use. I use my up and down adjustment. I very rarely use the cheater anymore. When I used to do repair work and things like that, I would use it a little bit. But I guess I just know how to tweak things with the angle. And again, like I said, if I'm maybe putting a bit more pressure on on cutting or a little bit less pressure, can also just adjust things ever so slightly for how you want to tweak it.
Cool. So that's definitely something pretty unique to Australia. It's so funny because like the Australian machines, I mean, I'm pretty aware of the few that there are, and they're all super interesting. Like this one is like, okay, it's similar to some American machines, but there's something about it that's really different. And then you have like the VJ machine that has that big arc that's like, okay, it's sort of like a mass, but it's something totally different. And then there's a few others like the Hall and whatever. But yeah, this one, I'm looking forward to seeing this one in real life someday because it's just
come and check it out. Come and learn the history of these machines.
Yeah. So cool. Okay. Well, I think that satisfies that question for now. Somebody had asked, what do you think is a good machine to learn with? Like if you're just starting, I mean, obviously you learned on this one.
It's a hard question to ask. That really depends on where you're based, what machines are available, and price point. And again, I really only know, I'd say a lot of the people probably in this chat are American, and there's a lot more American machines, which I'm not familiar with. I've never cut on one, I've never used them, haven't really even looked into what they are, or their price point and things like that. So for me, I've always learned on this one. I mean, in Australia, speaking from my experience, there are cheaper machines, but they're not great, to be honest. I hear of problems with them. And if you're a beginner cutter, I get the need that you don't want to spend a lot of money in the beginning because you don't know if you'll like it or you don't know if you'll be good at it. But I think you're going to have more problems if you buy a cheaper machine that is problematic.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know how to fix those problems on your machine or repair things or tweak things, or you can't get parts and things with that machine, then you're worse off. So I mean, I sort of say to people, go and try gem cutting lessons, go to a laptree club, learn what they've got, learn on their machines, learn a bit about cutting and how to maintain your machine, and then work out if you like it. But I think it's worth spending money on. It doesn't have to be the best machine out there, but don't go for the cheapest, because the cheapest isn't, it's cheap for a reason. It could have problems. You might not be able to get parts. There might not be, maybe the company went bust and they don't exist anymore, so you can't get help or a manual about it or anything like that. So either you learn on the machine someone else has, so they can maybe give you pointers, or do your research and find sort of a a midway machine, I guess. But it's different in every country. I couldn't tell you one brand over another because I only know the brand that I've used, which is Gemmaster, and I only know really Australian machines. I don't know the American
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah.
You're probably a better person to ask that question because you've studied them.
It's a good point. I mean, because sometimes people ask me that question a lot. And by the way, maybe we should, I'll deactivate your phone so your arm doesn't
Cool.
It's a good question because people ask me that a lot, and it is hard to answer because, of course, I'm going to recommend the one that I like. You're going to recommend the one that you like, but it's not always the best machine for somebody. It just so happens that the one that I like is pretty affordable and they ship around the world, which is why we even started using them at the school. But if you can't get someone to show you how to use it because you're, let's say, in America and you're far away from most people that use a handpiece machine, that might not make sense. It happens to be like a teacher, so I can be that person for somebody. But again, if you're in America, it's far away. Somebody asked, which model Gemmaster is that one that you have?
So as I mentioned before, it's a bit of a hybrid. It was a GF3, but really nothing about this is a GF3 anymore. It's got a new motor because Anthony built a new base. I got the motor and sort of put it all together. So it's equivalent to, I think, a GF4 or a GF5. I'm not sure, but it's fairly updated. Everything on this is virtually new parts. So it's got a new like alternator and everything below, new motor, new speed control, everything. So essentially it's a newer model machine, but just with some older parts.
Cool. Do you consider yourself like pretty geeky when it comes to tweaking out the machine, or was that like a one-time thing just to cut?
No, I'm not. And what? I recently had I had to replace the belt on this recently because it wore out. And I called Anthony. I was like, I can't remember how to get the other parts off to get the belt on. And he goes, yeah, you're not an engineer's daughter. He, like, I just, yeah, I repair it at what I need to. And I think it's really important to know how your machine works. It's not just about cutting. And Anthony always mentions this, it's not just about cutting. You need to know how to fix problems on your machine and stuff as well. You need to know when something goes wrong, how to fix it, what parts you need, how you can maybe tweak it, make it work for you and stuff like that. So I know the basics about machining and about my machine, but that's not where my mind is. That's not, again, my dad's an engineer, but I didn't get those traits from him.
Yeah. And it's true. It is a good, I mean, it's essential, especially if you're doing this professionally. Like it's the same as riding a bike. If you can't change a flat tire, then you're going to be stuck somewhere. If you can't.
Exactly.
But it's also good to kind of know your local engineer. For you have Anthony, who some of us know from the Fastening Technical Forum in Facebook. But
yes,
he's a great
exactly.
resource.
And he's fabulous. I mean, he's based in Sydney, so he's not local to me, but he's in Australia and he can send me parts if I need parts. He can, often we'll video chat if I go, I'm not sure what's going on here, or how can you. So for the build of this machine, he made everything in Sydney and sent me parts, and I had to come back to Adelaide and build it. And my dad helped me build it, partly because I needed a second person to build it. It was heavy, it was awkward and stuff anyway. But if we ran into any problems, I'd call Anthony up and we'd have video chat and go, right, what's happening here, or why is this not lining up there, or things like that. So he's definitely my go-to person for that sort of stuff, and I recommend him for a go-to for anybody. For people who want to learn cutting or are beginner cutters, I always recommend Fastening Technical. It's got a lot of good information in there.
Yeah.
I think Anthony's not as active in it anymore. He started the group, but I don't think he's always very active in it anymore. But there's a lot of good help in the group if people want it. And I just saw Chris's comment. Yeah, I think it's important to know, about the machine you choose. And this is where I sort of say, don't go for I know there's some cheaper brand fastening machines in Australia. I don't know their names, so I'm not going to name drop, but you can't find parts for them. They always break down. They're unreliable. Not enough people have them, so they can't help you about them. And that's really important to know. Like, I think you need to, if you're looking for a machine, make sure you know other people with that machine. You know if it's going to be problematic. You know where you can get parts. That's really important, and how to service your own machine.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's kind of part of the fun. I mean, I know for me, I started with a used Ultratech, which is like the sort of standard one in America, but I had to pretty much
Mm-hmm.
rebuild it as soon as I got it because there was something a little bit wrong with it. And then eventually I got
Yeah,
another one and I had to rebuild that one. And then by the time you rebuild it twice, you're pretty much, I mean, the fastening machine is pretty simple usually. Like it's not
yeah,
a complicated machine actually. It's not much more complicated than a bike. Everything's on the outside for the most part. So you
yeah,
just look at it, and if you have a little bit of logic, you can kind of see, okay, this does this, this does this, and here's where my problem is. So that,
yeah,
yeah, but it is,
absolutely. And I mean, on my older one, I had to replace the brushes a fair bit, and the the shop that used to make Gem Master machines were about 5 minutes up the road from me. So they're made in South Australia where I live. They were made really close to me, and they just closed down. So now they're being made in Sydney, New South Wales somewhere. And but I used to go into them and go, I need to buy some more brushes from you guys, and can you put them in for me, because you had to like dismantle some wiring and stuff to do it and remove the motor completely and all that sort of stuff. And it happened between my machine and when I was working for my old boss, their two machines as well. I was kind of always going and getting brushes replaced every 6 months or so. And it got to the point he stopped charging me, and he showed me how to do it, and so I had some spare brushes and stuff. So I just learned how to do those things on my own machine anyway. And it's good to learn that stuff. It's good to know that about your machine. And as Anthony preaches, you need to be a machinist sometimes as well to be a faceter. You need to know how to make your own tooling. You need to have the tools to make your own tooling. And he's very adaptive in the way that he does a lot of stuff, though. But I think, and certainly building this machine from scratch with the parts that were given, like you said, I know how these things work now. I know if there's a problem, I can work out where it is or what's caused it. So I can do a bit of diagnosis on it, but there's not really anything that goes wrong with these machines. They're great.
no, it's good. It's good. And it's a great experience to kind of own the machine now, like it's your machine, you built it, it's
Yeah.
customized now. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, Someone asked, where can you buy it? I think Gem Master, they have a website, right?
So I don't know if Gem Master, the brand, has a website. The company that now owns the rights to make them is called GemCuts. So it's gemcuts.com.au, I believe, and they're based in New South Wales in Australia. There's another website, again, in Australia called aussiesapphire.com.au. And sorry, it's .com, C-O-M. There's another website called aussiesapphire.com.au, and they've got, actually, I don't know if they've still got Gem Master, but they've got a couple of different machines and things on there, and parts and things. They're sort of the two main websites I would go if I need to buy dop sticks, if I need to buy transfer jigs, if I need to buy another handpiece, those sorts of things for this machine, and other machines within Australia, if people want to go there.
Cool. Somebody asked, on that machine, I think this is another Australian faceter, Cliff. He says, because the quill and head are so heavy on those, you can actually facet to depth with no hands just from gravity. And he teaches that to his students. Do you ever just let the machine do it, or it seems a little wild to me?
Ooh, I wouldn't know, because the spinning of the machine, it's going to knock that
Or
stone into the...
maybe it just means without pushing, just letting the head do the...
Yeah, I definitely, yeah, sometimes I do for sure, but depends on what the stone is. If it's a big stone, if it's a bit more of a tough stone, and I just want to get it cut quicker. I'm trying to cut these stones in hour, 2 hours, or 3 if they're a bigger stone and a bit more of a quirky cut. So, and I do less stages and stuff too. I guess if you're doing lots and lots of different stages of grinding and pre-forming and pre-shaping and all that sort of stuff, then yeah, I mean, again, I haven't used any other machine to know if this is a heavier quill than others. I don't know, but yeah, you certainly don't need to push, but it depends on what I'm working on, or if I'm frustrated going like, just cut faster, then I might push a bit harder. So
okay, well that goes into another group of questions that I'm going to put together. Steve asked, what kind of laps do you like to use? What's your sequence? And somebody else asked, Well, that one was to me, but I'm going to put it to both of us. Can you explain how to polish with the handpiece? But maybe we can compare how to polish yours versus
I
mine.
polish with a handpiece,
No,
as
I
in
mean, that was for me
compared to what?
compared to
Oh,
my
okay,
mass.
good.
So tell us,
Sure. So
unless it's a secret,
my
tell us
sequence.
your sequence. Yeah.
So I look, the laps that I've got in front of me, I've got a 320, a 600, and a 1200 as my shaping grits or my grinding grits. I don't really use the 320 much. It's not very worn in, so it hacks things up a fair bit. So if I want to pre-shape something really big, I'll pre-shape still on that one. I don't really use my saw much at all to shape or cut stuff. I'll just use the grinding wheel. And then I'll go to 600. My 600 is really, but if the 600 is new, again, it's still going to hack it up. So it depends on how much wear and tear your laps have had too. So, but typically, if it's a bigger stone and I maybe haven't preformed it, I'll use 600. And then I go to 1200, which is where I do most of my cutting on. If it's a softer stone, I sometimes just start with 1200. And that's a sintered lap. And then I'll go, again, depending on the stone, if it's like, say, a garnet, I might just do 1200, 14,000 polish. I don't pre-polish. If it's a sapphire or a spinel, I do use a pre-polish, and I usually use 8,000 on copper. And then my 14K, I think, is like a type metal sort of lap that I polish on. So they're really the main things I use. I don't do a lot of different stages. I find that 14,000 is a good enough polish, a good enough finish for the jewelry trade or for most of what I sell. Again, I don't really do 50,000 or 100K or anything like that. People most of the time don't get a loop out and can't tell the difference for jewelry and things like that. So yeah. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, I have almost the exact same sequence, and actually I'm using a 1200 centered lap as well. So we probably do have almost an identical. I'm using, something like a 320 as a rough like what I do hand preforming.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I'll just do it with hand. I would never do it on when it's stopped up. It's just too coarse for me still. It's just not worn in.
Yeah. And then 600, 1200 centered, and then to polishing, which is also going to be 14K, like 02, which is like regular commercial grit. I have a ton of polishing laps because people, I don't know, maybe the same for you, people are giving me all kinds of different stones, and I've just accumulated them because I've got all these fastening machines that I've collected, and they've come with laps. So I've got some funny ones, but mostly I just use a tin lap or a copper lap depending on what stone I'm working on. But the bat lap
To
for me,
polish, you use a copper polish?
yeah,
Or
like for sapphires, will sometimes, depending. Sometimes it's
okay.
giving me scratches. Just depends on what day of the week it is. Like it's got its own personality.
Like
So
you don't polish sapphires on Tuesday, right? After like 3 p.m. or
exactly, or I have to do a magic spell over the lap in order to make it work with the moon and everything like that. So
like a sacrifice to the gods. Like,
yeah,
please work today.
you have to do one drop of blood into the bat lap before it really gives the good polish. This is really the secret of 14K. Everyone says it's not good enough. It's because they haven't added blood into the mix. This is what, this is why, you blood, sweat, and tears. This is the secret. So, no, but
Do you know I haven't drawn much blood when polishing, but definitely with cutting, I've had many bloodied fingertips.
we've had a couple
just wearing
students.
down my.
Yeah, we've had a couple students on the day one preforming, and they're not paying attention, and right around the thumb, where they're preforming with their thumb.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, preform this way. Don't put your finger under the stone. But every once in a while, someone misses that part, and suddenly like, wow, okay, there's blood in the class. I wasn't ready for this, but it only happened twice, so it's okay.
I feel like you need to have that as a disclaimer on your brochure. You may draw blood, or like,
Well, usually I do.
Are you okay with blood?
Actually, the real disclaimer has to do with people's nails, because a couple of times people have come in with some, because we're in Bangkok, people get manicures when they come here. I mean, like the ladies usually. And every once in a while, someone will come in on day one with a really hot manicure, and I'm just like, I'm really sorry, but you're probably gonna have to cut those because you're gonna rip them up otherwise. And usually after the first day, they realize on their own, like, okay, I need to have my nails a bit shorter for this, because you're just too involved, you're too intimate with the lap to Yeah, and especially if you've got
Yeah.
nail gems and
See,
stuff.
well, they get in the way, like I had to trim my nails a little bit yesterday because they just start to get a bit too long, and I can't hold the piece of rough in my fingertips close enough to the wheel, and the fingernails get in the way. And I don't mind about, sometimes if I haven't got time, I'll grind them on my lap just to get them shorter so I can keep doing my job.
Oh, yeah, you're
So
pretty.
yeah, the fingernails, they get in the way for sure. But people always ask me, I get so many comments on how nice my hands are and how nice my nails are. And it's either because I do trim them down often and therefore they look semi-manicured, or, like these two fingers, always the nails just grow really like fast for me on those fingers, but you're not using these fingers when you're faceting or when you're cutting gems.
Yeah.
So people will see these and go, how do you have such nice nails? You can't be a cutter. And go, yeah, look at these three though. Like these are worn, there's like gouges in the nails, like the skin's worn down, they're like dry and cracked. Like these are the cutting fingers.
Yeah. So just whenever you show people your fingers, just show them those two. It looks
Yeah.
great. Somebody wanted to know, what kind of oil do you use when you're doing your polishing to mix with your diamond powder?
Yeah, so I mix my diamond powder with, and again, this is the way I was shown, and everyone has different methods. So I use a bit of diamond grit, a bit of Vaseline, and just a couple of drops of oil. So you can use sewing machine oil, you can use whatever. The only oil that I could find, which seems to be working fine, is paraffin wax oil, I think. I haven't used it for a while. Yeah, I just use like paraffin liquid, which I just got at Coles, and that does it enough. It's just to liquefy the mix, and then you just kind of work out how the consistency you want it to be. So usually, I don't know what parts I put in. I just know how it looks.
Yeah. You want to get
But
a
so
certain
yeah,
consistency, right? Not too
exactly. And
waxy.
you'll know if you've got it wrong because when you start polishing or pre-polishing, um, it'll either just gloss over and it's not going to polish. Like it just doesn't, it makes it shiny, but it's got lots of little marks. It means you haven't got enough diamond powder in it. So you put a bit more diamond powder in. If you've got too much diamond powder and maybe not enough of the others, it's going to be really kind of thick and sticky. You want it to be a bit more liquid than that. You want it to sort of glide over the lap
Yeah.
nicely.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize you were using Vaseline. I've met other people that do that. Even some people in Sri Lanka told me they have like a secret recipe with like Vaseline, hand cream oil, diamond powder, and they put it into this is for the factory. They put it into a pot and like mix it. I mean, like they cook it, and it's like
Oh, wow.
they cook because they're making diamond slurry for 30 people. So that's like they need a whole day's thing. But
Yeah,
I
I
was like,
bet.
why? They said, yeah, cooking it takes the water out of the Vaseline and whatever. Everybody's got their own recipe, I guess. I like the
Yeah,
sewing
well,
machine
again, this
oil.
is just what I've been shown, and I think Anthony uses something else he swears by, and every different cutter has, every different cutter has what works for them. They have the laps and the polishing that works for them, the different grits that work for them, and everyone swears by their own method, and that's fine. You find when you're cutting, you find what works for you and your setup, and that's fine, you know.
Yeah, and it kind of depends on which country you're in too, because I know for us, like I'm totally aware of all the cool stuff in America, but
Mm,
and same for you, right? Like ordering stuff from America is expensive, and the
yeah,
shipping and the import duties. Luckily, Australia has a big enough lapidary community where you have people like Anthony who make laps and other people who
yeah,
make laps, and but like in Bangkok it's the same. We can buy local laps, which sometimes are not good quality, but sometimes they are, depending on who makes them.
mm,
But then, yeah, if we want to have a special thing, like you can't really find a centered lap in Bangkok, like that's locally made, that
yeah.
they're coming from Russia or they're coming from, I don't know, China or something. Um, so yeah, it depends on which country you're in.
Yeah, well, and again, I've always had. I mean, look, we maybe don't have as many fandangled things as the US has, and when I'm in a lot of these forums and they're talking about all the different laps and things, it's Chinese to me. I don't know what any of that means, but I'm happy with the setup that I've been taught on and that I've learnt on, and maybe along the way I found some other things that work for me that no one showed me. But I work with what I can get in Australia, not because, I mean, I'm not too worried about the shipping and things. You're right, though, like the dollar sucks for us. But I'm satisfied enough with what I can source here that it works for me. So I haven't gone and explored out further, because if it isn't broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's the same in the US. Why would they look to Australia for our cutting laps and supplies and things? They've got a lot in the US and likewise in Bangkok. So if you've got enough in your area, you just find what works and make it work. And again, you're probably talking to other people who cut in your area, and so you're working off what they use and things like that. You're not really looking outside of your bubble, I guess.
Yeah.
And what else is out there?
It's quite interesting, though. I think your particular story is a bit, to me, it's interesting because I know so many traditional cutters in Europe that have also learned through an apprenticeship, and they, kind of use homemade machines, and they only use the laps that are basically almost like homemade to them, or whatever. They get laps made exactly what they need, which is just a certain blend of copper or tin, and they would never consider buying someone's lap or whatever. And it's funny to me because you're using, this sort of like modern technology, right? Like mass machines and stuff, but somehow you're still a little bit more connected to that traditional lineage versus like somebody who comes up in, let's say, the lapidary club scene. And of course they're in a community of people, but it's not like an apprenticeship, and you're not really getting that same kind of transmission of techniques in the same way as from a master cutter who is professionally has been trained by somebody else. So it's quite interesting.
And it's really interesting you talk about that. Like, you and I have been chatting since Tucson in private a lot about this sort of stuff, and different cutters from around the world, like different professional cutters around the world. And it's been really interesting to me. I've never communicated with these people. I was taught by my master, and he was taught by a master as well through an apprenticeship. And it's been interesting for me to I want to look into more my lineage of, well, how did these things get passed on down to us? And we're so similar in the techniques that the Europeans use. And that really fascinates me that, I've had no connection with them, but, we both use this type of lap, and we both use this process, and we both don't preform, or we both do preform, or, it's very interesting that all these different walks of life, and at the core of it is very similar. It's been really interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to figuring that story out too. I don't know anything about the Australian fasting history yet. I've found a couple books that I've just put to the side, said, okay, when I'm ready to tackle Australia, like these are going to be in my references, but I haven't looked at all.
It's a big place to tackle, because I think there's not a lot of professional cutters in Australia. Like, there's probably 8 or so that I can think of, if that. But a lot of people say that, there is a lot of cutters in Australia, but there's a lot of cutters up in the gem fields, because there's always cutters near where stones are mined, and they've specialized in cutting sapphire for 30, 40, 50 odd years, but maybe have never cut a beryl, or they've never cut an opal, or things like that. So they're in a specialized little bubble, but or a lot of them are hobbyists, hobby cutters and things like that, so the way they charge is different, or the way they polish is different, or how long they take, things like that. So there's kind of different groups. If you were to study Australia's cutting history, there's different groups, of, and how did the professional scene come over here, or who sort of originally brought it over here with a machine and started teaching it to people. Well, who taught it to someone, who taught it to someone else, someone else, someone else. There's never been an apprenticeship here. There's never been a school really for teaching fastening or lapidary here.
Yeah, so everybody's just either figuring it out their own way, or like you got lucky and found someone that could actually train you. Somebody just asked, and I'm going to pull this up from your Instagram and share a screen real quick. Somebody just asked, what does one of your rose cuts look like? So I'm just going to pull up a random one. So yeah, if you guys aren't following Laura on Instagram, she's Tatum Gems, and that was the first one that I just came upon. So what are these two? Just totally random.
These were, I think this particular post was talking about, I get asked for rose cuts a lot, and it's really hard to source them, and these were kind of the last hurrah at the moment until I can source more rough that I deem suitable for rose cuts. But there was one recently, that one, there you go, with some of the
these are more,
or the one next, well, maybe shows it as well. These were some of the freeform cuts, which take a lot longer to cut. to precision level because I'm using a mast. I'm not doing it jam peg. So every meet point is perfect. Every angle meets where it should. It's hard to cut in precision like that. It takes a long time and a lot of concentration as well.
So do you charge more for these freeform ones than just a regular round rose cut, just because your time, or?
I don't remember on this case if I did or not. I charge depending on the color. Obviously teals and party colors are more popular. Greens and green yellows are less popular, so you'll notice they're a little bit cheaper. And again, I mean, when I first started doing rose cuts, because you can get rose cuts cut overseas, commercially cut, but they're wonky and the meat points aren't very nice, and people can get them for a couple of dollars each. I haven't for a while, but people will still always complain, oh, these are so expensive, and for I can get them from Thailand for blah price and things like that. It comes down to the quality of the cutting, the quality of the polish, the quality of the stone. Most of these are free from inclusions. Again, like I said, I make sure that all the meat points are perfect and nice on these. But mostly I price them on the material. I would price them similar to if I was pricing a fully faceted stone, because there's still time spent on it. It's still faceted. It's not a cabochon. It's still taking me X amount of minutes, hours, whatever. I mean, a typical round rose cut might take 15 to 30 minutes, maybe. I don't really time them. These ones took an hour and a half each, kind of thing. Like, they just took longer because I had to write down every individual index, every angle for each index. Yeah. And I'm sort of tweaking it as I go along. So I try an angle that didn't work. I need to go a bit lower to get it to meet at this point here, or make that look symmetrical. So it's a lot of adjusting, and it takes a lot more time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's work, and you have to make your living and stuff.
And no one of those is the same either. So every time I go back to doing those freeform ones, I have to start the process again of, all right, well, these angles won't work for the next one, and it's that adjusting time again. So, but yeah, I mostly cut for the rough, not so much for, I cut for what the rough, I charge for what the rough is worth. I don't charge for shape or time or anything like that, I guess. I probably should more, but I still work off of roughly what the rough is worth.
Okay. And so somebody had asked, how many stones do you typically cut in a week? Good question.
This is a bad question. You and I have talked about this.
First of all, let's just keep in mind you're a one-person business. Yeah. You're doing all your social media. You're doing these Zoom chats. You're talking to customers. So you're wearing a lot of hats, same as me. You got to do all your own photos and everything like that. So of course you're not just sitting in the factory all day cutting.
Yeah.
But still.
That's right. It depends on the week. I might sit down and just focus on cutting for a week, and or let's just talk about the day. In a day, if I don't reply to messages, if I don't take photographs to post on Instagram, if I don't reply to emails, if I don't go to if I don't get orders, package them up and go to the post office, if I don't have any interruptions, I mean, what did we say the other week? Like 5 or 6 stones a day, maybe 7 on like a really, really good day. But I haven't cut that many. I haven't cut like that for a long time, because the busier I get, the more I put on social media, the busier I get, that there's more demand for cutting work, but also the more cutting work I do, the more sales I get, and there's more of this other office work. So there's more, trying to be mindful. And this is the thing with these Transformation Tuesdays that I've been doing too. It takes time to sit down and photograph the rough and document it along the way. I'm not usually cutting one stone from start to finish, or I am, but I'll dop up a batch of stones and I'm working on a batch at a time. I'm not dopping up one stone, cutting it from start to finish, then photographing it, things like that. So I've always got multiple stones on the go. And it really depends on where else my time needs to be spent. Like I said, if I'm replying to messages, if I put an Instagram post up, that obviously then generates more messages, comments and things that I need to reply to in a day. If I have orders come through that I then need to invoice and package up and then go to the post office, things like that. So my day is often broken up by interruptions and things like that. So, I mean, yeah, I would like to sort of average 5 or 6 stones a day in an ideal world. But that it's not like that every day for an entire week, every week. Certainly not. There's just too many other things within a business that I need to also be in charge of and also do. So it depends on the week, and it depends on what I'm cutting.
Yeah, and then you actually just answered another question. Somebody said you always cut from start to finish, and so you just said sometimes you're working on many stones at once.
Yeah, so I'll I mean, Friday I docked up maybe 6 or 7 stones to sort of work on over the next little while. I've got 3 transfer jigs, so I'll usually do batches of 3. So I'll cut 3 pavilions, I'll glue those up. While I'm waiting for those pavilion glues to dry, I'll cut the next 3 pavilions, and then by then those crowns from the first 3 were ready to cut, so I'll cut those crowns and dot those other ones up. And I try and be productive, because it's also for the glue that I use, I don't want to just be gluing one stone at a time either. So you've got to have, and this is, I guess, what I learned from working in a repair business and for a cutter before, because you do batches of things. You never sit down to cut one stone at a time. Well, for me anyway, because I run a business. I've always got multiple stones on the go. I've always got to have something ready, because if I'm waiting on glue, I don't want to be sitting here twiddling my thumbs. Or maybe I use that time to then package orders. I'll go to the post, depending on what I've got to get done that day. But I've always sort of got to think 1 or 2 steps ahead of what I'm doing and where I'm at. So, yeah, it's hard with, people often ask me if I recorded the weight before I do a transformation, and I often forget, because I'm just sitting there shaping a whole bunch of stones up before I glue them, and then I go, well, I've already taken weight off, and I didn't weigh it, and I didn't document. Like, it's just another thing that slows down the process of productivity of getting things cut. So
yeah, that happens to me a lot too. I'll get through the preform, and then I'm like, oh man, I didn't even. And for us, sometimes if we're working
you don't think of it at that time, and you pull it out of a parcel, so it's not an individually wrapped stone with a weight on it anyway.
Yeah. So here's a really interesting one. How many stones do you have to cut to make your living? That's complicated.
Ooh. Okay, well, I'm not going to fully answer that, but it depends on what you're cutting. So I don't cut a lot of quartz because, I mean, quartz is a pain to cut, but quartz isn't, if cutting a quartz takes as long as cutting a sapphire, and quartz is worth maybe $30 or $40 a carat when it's finished, and sapphire's worth, $400 or $500 a carat when it's finished, talking wholesale Australian dollars. If they take the same amount of time, I'm going to cut the sapphire over the quartz. So it depends on what you're cutting and what you can. It also depends on your audience and what you can get for those stones too. So I will also cut stones that I know my audience wants. I know my base figure of what I need to make in a week to cover my bills, my rent, my electricity, my running costs of my business, but also to cover my time for the marketing I spend doing on my own business, and things like that. And if I'm leading up to doing a stock release, so I'll cut a bunch of stock and put it on my website once a month, and then throughout the month I might just drip feed some other things to sell on social media. Throughout that time, if I'm only going to be getting my main boost of income when I do a stock release, I need to make sure that during that time I'm also making money cutting other gems throughout the week. Another thing with doing repair work and stuff like that, repair work doesn't pay that well, or cutting other people, for me at least, cutting other people's rough doesn't pay as well, because I'm charging by the hour. And when I'm doing things like that, I don't want interruptions, because I'm on the clock. I'm charging them for my time to just cut their stone. So I'm not engaging in messages, phone calls, emails. I'm not, posting things I'll do that at a different time of day. But I don't earn as much money doing that sort of stuff as I do cutting my own rough and selling it. And also cutting my own rough means that I can ensure that it's decent quality, it's not going to have cracks or problems and things like that. So that's more why I go that way, and because I earn more money doing that.
Yeah.
But you need to sort of, I guess, to answer the question in a roundabout way, you need to assess what your minimum what you need to earn minimally in a week to cover your bills, to cover your costs, and also obviously extra to keep buying more rough to keep cutting as well.
Yeah.
Once you work out that, you can work out what you charge for your stones and how many of those you need to cut in a week to make ends meet. So
it takes a little while to figure that out, right? Like once you've decided that you're going to be a professional cutter, you kind of have to figure out how often do you actually sell a stone? Is it every day or is it every month or whatever?
yeah,
Are you making $10,000 profit out of one stone? Or are you making like $100? It's just going to depend
yeah.
exactly on what you said, like what stone, what market. I know for me last year, or maybe it was a year before, we put together a web shop, and we hadn't really saw all the stones together with all the numbers before. And then I was putting all these stones up and I was like, man, we've got all these garnets and all these tourmalines, and the tourmalines are pretty much usually worth double what the garnets are, but they take the same amount of time to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we should stop doing garnets because I mean, the tourmalines are worth,
Yeah,
and of
it's
course sapphires are to the next level. Like,
mm,
but can you afford a parcel of rough sapphires? That's a stumbling block
yeah,
as well. And you might,
absolutely. It depends on, and that depends on if you're cutting in your case garnets and you're not making as much profit on a garnet. Well, then how are you ever going to make enough to then afford that sapphire parcel one day?
yeah,
It's a gamble because it takes time to build up an audience, and I've built up an audience, and I've got customers that buy from me very regularly. But I've also worked out what stones my customers want. So for me, like tourmalines are pretty, but I don't sell many. If I put tourmalines on the website, they just sit. They don't. People don't rush to buy tourmalines from me. But then sapphires, I just can't get enough. I can't source enough. I can't cut them fast enough. How well they sell. And there is slightly more profit margin on sapphire, but it, like you said with profit, it depends on what you paid for that rough, what you can sell it for, and how long it took you to cut them, how many in that parcel is cuttable as well, how much loss you're going to have because of maybe an inclusion or something like that, or you've got to orientate it in not the best way. So yeah, it depends on what your profit margins are on what you're cutting, and also who your audience is and how they shop with you. If you're maybe only just starting out, then maybe you're only selling a stone a week or a stone a month or whatever it may be. I've been fortunate in the way that I've built my business that because I release stock once a month, there's a demand, and people know that once a month they flock to the website in hopes to get a stone over someone else. And that's grown to work in my advantage. It might not work for everybody, but it works for me and how I've structured my business up until this point. And again, I didn't set out with a structure like that. I've just gone with, I've followed where my direction's taken me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And you've obviously made something that's very unique for your workflow, for your sensibilities. Of course, the way you do your graphic design and your photos and stuff is all very you, right? So, and of
Yeah,
course, the back end is going to be the same way. How you do the business, how you organize things,
yeah,
it's pretty personal. Like your way probably wouldn't work for me. My way probably wouldn't work for you, and
exactly.
on and on.
And that's the thing, people, look, I see people out there trying to maybe mimic or copy the way I do things, and it might not work for them. And you need to find your own way of business that works for you and works for your clients, and to get the clients that you want. And that was something you and I talked about in Tucson as well with some other cutters, that their business model might work really well for them, but it wouldn't work for me, or it wouldn't work for you. And you need to find your own way of what works, and you'll find things along the way that don't work. And that's where you got to listen in business. That's where you got to listen to, I tried this, it didn't work, I'll try a different approach, and this might work better, or maybe I'll revisit that later and it might work later, but it didn't work now because of X factor or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And especially with coronavirus at the moment, everybody's working out maybe different strategies on how to make business work for them. So you've got to be adaptable in any kind of business.
Yeah.
It can't be rigid. It's got to be fluid. It's always got to change. You've got to keep reinventing things or trying different approaches.
Yeah. And you really have to figure out what your particular skill and advantage is. I know for me, like being in Bangkok, one of my main goals when I moved here was like, I want to find the best factory here so that I can be, this person who can offer like large orders services, something that I could never do when I was in the States. You know, you just can't cut 500 stones or even 100 stones that someone gives you. And it's too expensive, you know, to charge my price per hour on 100
Yeah.
stones. I actually feel bad to even tell someone that, but it's like, okay, but we
Yeah.
actually have this good factory that we, you know, it took
Yeah.
us a couple years to find it, but it's, you know, this is, for me, that's part of my business here. Whereas for you, that wouldn't make sense because you don't have a factory in Australia that can cut good stones and
Exactly.
cheaper than you
And
can.
people do come to me for that, you know, and I feel bad turning them away, but that's not part of my business plan or my business structure. It's not an area that I want to grow in my business. Like I said earlier, the busier I get through social media, the more demand for cutting and the less time I have to cut. So, you know, I try and manage my time as best as I can with doing marketing, with doing cutting, with going to the post office, all those sorts of things. So it's a different, you and I run very different businesses and juggle different things, you know, but we've both addressed where we want our businesses to go and what structure we want that to take. So, and that works for us.
Yeah. So somebody had asked, do you ever facet synthetic material? So maybe this is a good moment to talk about Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And I've got a couple photos of that.
Sure.
So was it 2 years ago you took part in the Somewhere in the Rainbow collection?
Yeah, so this was, well, I guess I'll address that question first. I don't typically cut synthetic material because, again, it's not valuable to me to on-sell. I don't think for my business there's not a market for people to buy synthetics from me, and it doesn't, I couldn't charge a lot for them, like I said with the quartz versus sapphire. So I don't really cut it, I don't really sell it. I really like working with natural stones, although funnily enough, one of the topics I teach in gemology is synthetics. So I teach a lot about them. But this is a really good example. You're right, Justin. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Somewhere in the Rainbow or Shelley Sargent, she's been curating this amazing collection in Tucson, Arizona, and she's got a museum collection of wonderful pieces of jewelry, wonderful gem specimens, all sorts of stuff. But she also curates this lapidary event. It's an exhibition, it's not a competition of any kind. And she's done it for the last 4 years, maybe 5 years, I think. I'm not sure how many years she's done it for. But so this was my submission for 2019. It was revealed in 2019 at the Gem Show. And what she does is every year there's a different color theme. She'll gift half a synthetic ball of corundum to her chosen cutters. So she's chosen 12 cutters every year, and I was one of 12 last year. So my theme, the year I did it, the theme was green. We all got given the exact same colored green ball of synthetic sapphire, and of the 12 lapidary artists she gave them to, we were given the freedom to cut whatever we wanted. So there were people, you know, like Dalen Hargrave was in it. He carved some beautiful things. Some people chose carving. Some people chose fantasy cutting. Some people chose regular faceting like myself. And it was really cool because we all started with the exact same size piece, the exact same color. And it was really interesting to see how varied they turned out, both with creativity and color and shapes and things like that. So this one was a bit of a struggle for me because, as we talked about earlier with design and where I get my creativity for a design, you know, I work with the rough shape. Working with a synthetic piece of rough, there isn't a quirky, natural kind of shape to it. It was just this elongated piece of rough. But also because it's a split ball, it's not, you know, it's a long piece, but it's not deep enough to cut that as a full length rectangle stone and still have correct pavilion angles on the stone. So I had to cut the stone in half or in some way to have the length to depth ratio correct to cut a well-proportioned stone. So I originally cut it sort of 2/3 of the way down and just kind of, you can't tell in the first photo, but the tip was sort of tapered off. So I thought, well, that's just an off cut, and I just, that bit there. So I just wouldn't use that bit. So I cut it originally to have the elongated shape, which you can see in the next one. And only later did I decide that I would I could actually still cut that smaller offcut. And I think the smaller offcut still worked out to be about 3 carats or so. So it wasn't small. But you can see it took me a little while to work out a shape. And I think, again, using my pencil method, I kind of, once I'd worked out the external girdle shape, I faceted in my main facet. I cut in my main facet. And then you can see in the third photo, I've used pencil marks to sort of draw different faceting designs. And, I played around with that for a little bit. If I didn't like it, I just, wet my finger and rub it off. That's fine. That's easy. And then as I cut it, I sort of just traced down those angles to get the index and angle to line up with how I've drawn it with a pencil. And that's sort of the way I like to map out some things like that. But I did find a challenge with this one of trying to create a different sort of shape, because I didn't have a nice, unusual shape to begin with in the rough because of synthetic. But typically, synthetics aren't my jam to cut, because they just don't, from a selling point of view, you're not going to make a living off of cutting and selling synthetic gems. Yeah. I think for beginner cutters or hobby cutters, you can certainly cut bigger stones with synthetics, and they're cheap for you to practice on. If you're a competition cutter, obviously you can use synthetics and things like that. But for my business, I sort of skipped that part with synthetics. I guess I went straight to naturals, and I never learned how to. I don't know if this is just an Australian thing, but I know a lot of hobby cutters or learners will start fastening a glass marble or things like that. So I never really did that. Because I never learned through a lapidary club, I sort of skipped that whole initial start to the trade. So to me now, there's not much purpose or point cutting a synthetic for my business for saleability. It just wouldn't be worth the time versus money.
Yeah. I know for this year, for the Somewhere in the Rainbow collection for 2020, since it's 2020, they decided to change it a little bit. So instead of 12 cutters, this year it's 20 cutters. So I guess the exhibition is going to have to be a lot bigger to accommodate more. But so I'm part of the Somewhere in the Rainbow this year. So they're just getting ready to send out the bulls. And this year it's like an electric orange, like this really hot orange. So I'm looking forward. I'm guessing it's going to be just something exactly like this, orange, half flame fusion sapphire bull, and then whatever you can work out. So for yours, since you cut two, did both of them go into the collection, or they just choose one?
Yeah, they did. So I mean, look, my year, and even the ones that were revealed this year in Tucson were just amazing. They just get better every year. But my year, they said, look, cut the bull how you want. You can cut one stone, you could cut 3, you could cut whatever you wanted. Some people will sort of cut one stone and return to the offcut piece. I used both of my offcuts in the end. Dalen Hargrave and another one, Sean Smokovich, I think that's how you pronounce his name. They just went above and beyond and created a whole landscape. So I should have included photos of that. Dalen created a pond scene where I think the frog, he carved a frog, I think, out of his bull. But then he also carved lily pads, a pond. It was mounted on wood. It had a mushroom on the side. He included, he added all sorts of other gems to it and created a whole scene, which was just unreal. And Sean also did similar. He carved, I think he carved part of a tree out of his green bull, and then also carved some aquamarine to go with it, and also fabricated some silver with some set stones in the silver, which kind of all collated it together. So his piece was just above and beyond. And I think this year in Tucson, they had pink was the flavor or the color, and a few people did multiple stones as well. So in my year, there was a few other people that cut 1 or 2 stones from their bull. So again, we were given no rules. We could cut whatever we wanted from them, however we saw fit. We could carve, facet, fantasy cut, whatever. It was, the joy of it is that it's up to your creativity. You have no limits. You have no bounds. So
well, now I'm kind of inspired. I never thought about doing 2 stones. So once I get my bull, I have to think about maybe I could just do 1 stone. So that'll be kind of cool.
Yeah, you could do a suite or something of different style, or an evolutionary kind of whatever.
Oh wow, now you're giving me too many crazy ideas.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was like, we'll talk about designs off this. I don't want to like give anyone else inspiration for your thing.
Okay.
But yeah, the sky's the limit. It
Yeah,
was fun.
yeah. No, it's cool, and it's cool. It's cool. It's kind of unfair that you have to be in the same year as Dalen Hargrave, because who's going to be able to go, against that? Because he's obviously like the
It
master.
was just his was just another league. It was absolutely another league, and I wish I'd supplied a photo of that one. You'll have to check his out later.
Yeah,
But look, it's good that they use. So I guess the use of synthetics is, and the reason why she uses it for these exhibitions for other people watching, is that you can use a bigger piece, so you can have more versatility in a design because you're working on a larger stone, but also the repeatability of the color. And that's a lot of the time why synthetics are in the market, because you can repeat the color over and over again. You're not going to have any sort of quirky mishaps or anything unforeseen about it, I guess. And you're working with much bigger stones and cheaper stones in case something went wrong, because it's not a natural stone. And actually another one, I think I saw John Bradshaw in this chat earlier. I don't know if he's still here, but a shout out to him. He did the Summer in the Rainbow exhibition a few years ago when they did blue. I think this was like the second year round. And his bull, or I think some of the bulls that year, and this is typical of synthetic Vanui sapphires for anyone who's seen them in the bull, his had just a really thick dark blue rind on the outside of the bull, and the rest of the bull was clear. And so they had a really fun challenge of positioning that color. And so their blue ones did turn out very differently depending on their bull they had. And a little trick about faceting that maybe not everyone in this group chat knows if they're not faceters, that the deepest saturation of color is going to come from the culet of a stone. So for him, he positioned this dark rind just perfectly in the pavilion of the stone, and the stone face up is like dark blue, like darker than the curtains in your background, Justin.
yeah.
And looking at the bull, originally it was completely clear with just like this thin rind. And so that was really fascinating, a really good challenge for cutters to, again, manipulate color and work with that to their advantage and see how they could face it up.
And I'm sure if you turned his stone on the side, the entire stone is clear except for probably just the culet.
Absolutely. Yeah, so looking at it table down, there's just like a sort of a ring of blue color around the culet, and the rest of the stone is colorless. Yeah.
It's funny because in Thailand here, we see actually a lot of natural sapphires like that. They call them bluff stones. And from the face up, they're super blue, but on the side, they're all white except for just the culet. The cutter did the same thing. They had that rough and figured out that one spot where they have the blue, which is probably, if you think about historically, before there was such a fad or whatever, an interest in party color, like people would have not cut them that way. That stone that we showed earlier where you had the different things, they probably would have positioned the blue in the bottom, cut off the rest, and try to get the bluest possible stone, because before blue was, still blue is obviously where it's at, but like now you can get away with selling a blue and yellow or a blue and green or whatever. Whereas maybe in Thailand they wouldn't do that. So even today.
And this comes from different, different cultures of what's desirable, different cutting houses of what their parameters that they would like to cut in and things are as well. And this is where I like cutting these weird, challenging stones of, like these stones with sort of splotches of color and things, going, well, where can I position this, and what's it going to result in with the end color? That's the part of the challenge. So, but you're right, like a lot of those, I know a lot of Sri Lankan stones often will have color patches like that. Maybe Madagascan as well. I'm not really sure. I haven't cut a lot of Madagascan sapphires, but it comes down to the skill of the cutter as well to orientate it in the right way to get the right saturation of color that you want. And likewise with orientating, we talk about this with diamonds when I've done diamond grading, where an inclusion or a color patch is located, like if it's located closer to the pavilion, that inclusion is going to be seen like 10 or 20 times within the stone. It's going to reflect and refract around the stone. No different with color. If you position it where most of the angles meet in the culet of the stone, it's going to refract around and show you that better color. Whereas if you position that inclusion of the color near the girdle or in the crown, it's, in an inclusions instance, it's just going to be seen maybe once. for color, like it's just going to sort of, you're going to see it as a blotch. It's not going to color the entire stone.
Yeah.
And that's something else you sort of learn. I mean, I guess that's part gemology and part gem cutting knowledge of
Yeah.
how to position things.
And so, yeah, I guess that's a good segue. We can speak about that a little bit, because you and I are both gemologists and gem cutters, and you're teaching
Mm-hmm.
gemology. I'm teaching a little bit of gemology inside my gem cutting class. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about, you know, how important is it for the cutter to know gemology, and or even is it important? Can you just be a cutter without knowing anything about the nature of, you know, crystallography and the science of gems?
Great question. Such a triggering question. I think it's absolutely, I can't stress how important it is to be a gemologist if you're a gem cutter. For me, you and I both have very different stories, so I might interview you back on this, but I was a gemologist before I was a gem cutter, or actually through the Gemological Association of Australia, or the GAA, we offer a 2-year part-time diploma. So I was in my second year of my gemology diploma when I started learning to cut,
Mm-hmm.
and it absolutely helped. And I don't think about how much it helped because I just knew that stuff before I started cutting. When I meet cutters who haven't studied gemology, I can't fathom, I don't understand how they could get by not knowing certain things, or not understanding cleavage, or not understanding pleochroism and how to orientate a stone. So I've had cutters ask me, things that I thought were simple when we talked about Australian sapphire earlier, having blue down one axis and green down another. If they don't understand that can occur or why that occurs, then they can't understand how to best orientate the gem to get a color. If a customer's requesting a certain color, you know, you just need to understand some of these things about pleochroism and also crystallography. Different crystals have, they have different hardnesses down different directions, like directional hardness, like kyanite, things like that. Even zircon has directional hardness a lot. Things like cleavage planes in topaz, stuff like that. You've got to orientate it right. You've got to find the cleavage plane first of all, and then orientate it so that it's not going to be parallel with a facet. There's so many things. Gemology just, they go hand in hand, absolutely. And not every gemologist understands. Most gemologists don't understand gem cutting, the things that we know, but I think most gem cutters should really understand the basics of gemology for sure.
Yeah.
And even not even from a practical cutting side, when you're buying rough as well, if you're buying a parcel and you might, maybe the miner or the dealer has sort of peppered some other stones in there as well, gemology helps you to understand what you're seeing, and maybe that one's the odd one out, and why is that? And it fluoresces and the others don't. That means it could be this or that, or the scientific reasoning behind things, even when you're buying stuff, is so crucial in not getting ripped off, I guess, or paying the right price for things too. So
Yeah,
it's absolutely crucial.
I know I was doing a project last year where I was researching the history of gem cutting in London, and I was able to find some pretty interesting quotes, because like the first gemology school was in London, right? Like Gem A was the
Mm-hmm.
first school, and so there's some
Yeah.
interesting quotes from like the early 1900s, like 1920s and 30s, where they're going, like the gem cutters are getting interviewed and going, the reason why we're so much better than other cutters, like for instance, they're specifically referencing like Sri Lankan cutters where they're getting the sapphire from, and they're saying the reason why our stones look better is because we understand refractive index, because we understand gemology, because because gemology was really new at that time, like there wasn't a lot of schools. It was just this one in London. And so like maybe London, I mean, I can't really say definitively because I don't know right now, but it seems like probably London cutters had the chance to learn before anybody else, because they had the organizations built up what ended up being the Gem A and all that stuff. And even till today, I mean, of course, you could have a cutter here in Thailand or in Sri Lanka or wherever who has no gemology knowledge, but has such a long experience with stones that they develop the same thing. You eventually you'll
Absolutely.
become really, really good at cutting the sapphire that's local to you or whatever it is. But I think for people that are getting into it now, and for us being the younger generation, like, you really can't wait like 20 years of being somebody's apprentice or whatever, or just being a factory cutter and having your own imagination to suddenly discover that there's such thing as pleochroism, or that there's a C-axis, or whatever it is, like,
Mm.
why would you
I
wait?
think that's a really good point that you raised there as well about Sri Lankan cutters, Thai cutters, any of these cutting factories, even cutters in Colombia where they're close to the emerald mines and things like that. They over time they've built their specialty and they've learned about cutting emeralds, and they know everything there is to know about cutting emeralds. Or Sri Lankans cut a lot of sapphires or garnets or spinels, or whatever, and they've become specialized in that one gem variety. And to that point, maybe they don't need gemology. They don't need to do a gemology degree because they only work with sort of one or two different types of gems, and they've gotten really good at it. Whereas I'm talking about cutters like yourself, myself, American cutters and things, where we're cutting a range of gems, and every gem handles differently. They all have different refractive indexes. They all have different pleochroism or brilliant scintillation, all these sort of things, and gemology is, it's part physics, it's part crystallography, it's part chemistry, it's all these, sorry, it's all these important things that, it makes sense as a whole that we need to understand all these different factors so that when we're looking at different gems, we can understand them a bit better, whereas these cutters in these remote places, they've, like you said, they've kind of come to this realization about the stones that they interact with and affect them. And that's why they've honed in on that, but maybe a Sri Lankan cutter wouldn't know how to cut emeralds to their best advantage or best yield and things like that. So when you're a versatile cutter and you're cutting lots of different gems, I think it's definitely important. You need
Yeah.
to understand that they look differently.
And that being said, I mean, there's probably definitely some people, even in our audience, that are probably so versed in cutting synthetics that they'll know so many things about different varieties of synthetics that you and I probably don't know about, because it's not our thing. And I also kind of wanted to take that back a little bit too, when we're talking about how everybody can make their own business model based on their own personality and whatever. We had some friends from Canada that came here last year to
Mm.
do GIA course, and I was really shocked to discover this is a husband and wife cutting team in Canada. And they were telling us like pretty much 90% of their business model is cutting synthetics. And that's like, they make a lot of money cutting like boutique synthetics, and sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
quirky varieties and stuff, like rare ones, but mostly just sapphires and color change, alexandrites and stuff like that. But they make their
Yeah.
whole living off just cutting really good synthetic
Yeah.
stones. And I was like, wow, I didn't know you
But
can.
you're right, though. This is their business model, and they've made that work. Therefore, their customers know to come to them for that sort of stuff. And likewise, I've made my sort of business or brand or name or whatever you want to call it. I like cutting quirky shapes, unusual shapes. So when people come to me wanting, 10 repeatable, calibrated 10 by 8 oval morganites, that's not my business. I don't sell that. I don't cut it. I can't source it. But there are a million other companies that do that sort of thing. Go to them.
Yeah.
Whereas mine, and likewise with synthetics aren't my niche. But this couple in Canada, obviously, that's their niche, and you're not going to go to them for a freeform cut sapphire like you would for me, sort of thing. So yeah, it's about finding your niche, and the audience will come. But if you if you dabble across all these things, it's a bit less unpredictable. It is more unpredictable with the type of clients you're going to attract, because you kind of dabble in too many things and you don't have your niche, you don't have your market and your audience.
Yeah. And it might take a little
I
while to
think,
figure that one out. I mean, I know for me, it definitely took a few years, and I feel like only in the last couple of years being here that I feel like we've figured out our audience. The social media thing is working in our advantage. We've honed in on a couple of things that work well for us. And yeah, like you said, we're not going to do everything. We're not going to do certain materials because it doesn't make sense for us or our audience. And so, yeah, everybody has to figure that one out for themselves. And,
yeah.
for me, there's so many disadvantages with being here in Thailand. Like, we're so far from the customer. I don't know if this is the same for you, where I think you mostly sell online, but like, as I
Mm.
was talking, we were talking the other day with Chris Hood on Wednesday's chat. And, for him, he can sometimes interact with the customer personally and directly, whereas for me that almost never ever happens. Everything's on social media or whatever message. And I think for you it's the same, right? Like you're not really
Yeah,
um, seeing the customer. You don't have a store
absolutely.
in that way. So yeah, maybe
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it's very different for Chris because he has a shop front and he has a very successful business that customers come to him face to face. And he probably, I unfortunately couldn't make it to that chat, but most of his clients would be face to face and local type people. So he may sell some things overseas as well. I'm not sure, but that's the minority of his client base. Whereas for me, and like yourself, it's all online. I don't have a shop front. Um, a lot of people know me in South Australia, but I don't have a lot of clients here, just to do with economy and whatever else. I've got a lot of clients in Australia along the East Coast. I've got a lot of clients in the UK, the US, New Zealand, some through Asia, a lot of different places. So I mean, I do chat with them through social media, and that feels, face to face for me. But yeah, it's not the same as a shop front of physically meeting them and things like that. So I guess it comes down to, it's important with my marketing and my photography that that I'm an honest person, and I am anyway, that I'm honest, that I take accurate photography of my gems because they're buying these stones sight unseen. I need to make sure that I can replicate the photos to be true to what they are. And the best compliments I get is when people say, look, they look better than the photos, because I think the photos are pretty good.
yeah, yeah, no, that is a
It's
good point.
nice to hear that feedback of people saying, oh, well, it's not what I expected. I think I've really ever had that from somebody. Most people are very happy with the photos, that they're true and accurate, or if they want more photos or a video, I'm happy to oblige and cater to them how I can through the internet. So
Okay, well, let me throw a few questions at you that are easy, because I know we're getting about to 2 hours here and we won't go for much longer, but there's some easy questions and there's some good questions that I want to get to.
sure.
First of all, while we're still talking about gemology, somebody asked, is the GAA still going to go ahead with their online courses?
Who asked that? Was it Sarah or Catherine? Are they
No,
pulling my chain?
Josh Grigg.
Josh. Oh, Josh Grigg. Hi. Sorry. Repeat the question. Are they going to go along with?
The
Are
online
they going to
courses.
go along with online courses? Um, Look, they're looking into it. So at the moment, obviously with coronavirus and things like that, we've had to teach. We've had to move to teach the diploma online, which for our organisation, we haven't done sort of online courses and things like that before. So we're not set up, and we're working through getting set up for teaching that way. So I think in the future, we're going to look at doing some short courses online, which will be really exciting, but it's really, really early stages. Gem 1 students, which I think Sarah just popped up and said, we're continuing to teach online, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But the Gem 2s, it's just too complicated because it's their final year. We need to make sure the exams, are accurate and fair. Everyone's getting enough time in the laboratory testing gems and things like that. And I mean, Australia's done a really good job of fighting coronavirus, but each state's different, and we have to make sure that it's collective across all states, that we give the same fair opportunities to all states. So we've had to postpone Gem 2 teaching this year, but yeah, Gem 1 is definitely going ahead. So I don't know if Josh was studying or not, but yeah, definitely check in with your state about what courses and things are available.
Okay, this one's for when we were talking about doping. Are you using wax or glue or both?
I use glue. I use a 2-part epoxy glue. Again, that was what I was taught with. I was taught to use sapphires sometimes, wax for sapphires sometimes, but I don't have wax in my workshop, so I haven't used wax for a long time. I'm happy with the glue because, again, I do sort of batches, and I know that it takes maybe half an hour for the glue to dry, and I'll just work during that time. So that suits me fine.
Okay. Are you involved at all with heat treating? I know a lot of Australian sapphires need or often are treated. Do you buy heated, or do you ever get your stones heated afterwards?
No, I
For
don't
the
dabble
dark
with heating
ones?
at all. I think it's mostly done on the gem. I know of a guy up in Queensland that does it if I wanted to get stones sent to him for heat treating. But no, I don't heat my stones, or I've never had stones sent to be heated. A lot of the rough that I've sourced is unheated. Sometimes it's heated as well, but yeah, I haven't really dabbled in it. And I don't know if Chris talked about it the other night at all, or if he heats his Tassie stones or gets them sent up to be heated. I'm not sure.
He said that he has come around to heating, and he does
Yeah,
sometimes buy and get some stuff heated because he kind of has built up this understanding that without heated stones, the gem trade doesn't really function. Like the mining side can't function without the stones getting heated.
yeah,
So he's kind of changed his opinion
yeah,
to being like no heated until now. He's like, okay, there's market for both. It's good for the trade to have both because without
yeah,
the heated stones, the miners can't afford to find the good ones because it's such a rare thing
yeah,
to get the perfect ones.
yeah. I mean, I guess my opinion on that is I'm not biased towards heated or unheated. I'm not against heated stones, but I don't need to improve every unheated stone either. I've been fortunate with the rough that I've bought that I'm happy with how they look. And I don't live anywhere near the gem fields. People maybe don't realize how large Australia is. I don't live anywhere near them, so I can post things up to this guy in Queensland, but it's not something that I've sought out to do, or I haven't had enough of a batch that have needed heating to make it worth my while to send them to him. So I've just managed with the stones that I've bought that have been unheated, and they've turned out okay. But again, it comes down to knowing how to orientate them and cut them to maybe give a bit more life to them.
Okay. Here's one that I really, really like, one that we haven't asked at all anywhere before. As
Mhm.
faceting is a repetitive type of manual work for a job, do you ever get burnout or like from the mundane or the same routine all day if you're cutting all the time?
No, I don't actually. And maybe that's because I cut unusual different stones. As I mentioned before, I don't like cutting batches of calibrated stones and even with the rose cuts, I don't like doing batches and batches. I mean, I know when I post 6, more than 6 people want to buy them, but I'm not going to sit there and cut 50 because that would be monotonous for me. I mean, that being said, like I make sure that it's different enough, but I do like a bit of routine, and gem cutting is enough creativity with boundaries that it works for me. So I wouldn't call myself a creative person, but the cuts that I do are creative, but I still have boundaries and parameters to work within. And the same with, I do like how methodical gem cutting can be with going through the different stages of grinding, polishing, and all that sort of stuff. But it's still different enough for each stone that it's still exciting every time I cut a gem. Like I still get excited every gem I cut. So yeah, it's fine for me.
Here's another one. I'm just pulling out the ones that I like now. Are you gonna
Yeah.
are you ever gonna teach an apprentice?
Yeah, I'd like to, for sure. Definitely. When I have a bigger workshop and I've got the setup and space to do it, I fully believe in passing on this skill. I was very fortunate to learn this from a master cutter, and of the other master cutters or the other professional cutters that I know in Australia, they all work by themselves. Everyone's self-employed, and no one's passing on those skills. So I'm quite young in this industry for cutting, and a lot of these other cutters in Australia, at least, are all sort of in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're at retirement age, and they haven't passed on those skills to the next person. So I think it's really important that if you're in a position to, I think you really should pass those skills on. There's enough work out there in this niche industry if you are good at what you do and you know where to find it and how to hone in your skills. So yeah, I would in the future, definitely. I see the importance to it.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to that. I know Victoria and I have also talked a lot about not if, but when we're going to start taking on apprentices, because I think
Yeah.
obviously we have a school, we have the IGT school here, so we're already training people. But I think to take someone all the way to the final level, you really need to take them into your own studio and
Yeah.
give them. You need to show them what it's like as a business, not just as this is how you do cutting, because it's more than that
Yeah.
and
You
whatever.
need to map things out along the way. You need to say, oops, this mistake happened. How do I problem solve? A lot of cutting, for me at least, and I'm good at this, a lot of cutting is problem solving. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm good at cutting on the fly. That's why I like doing these quirky cuts, because I don't follow diagrams. I don't follow books. I know the refractive indexes and things, or the critical angles that I need to stay above, and the rest of it is problem solving and just figuring it out. And you've either got a mind that's good for working that out, or you don't. But you know, sitting alongside of someone, and I was always fortunate when I worked with Scott, you know, sitting alongside of him, I'd go, okay, so this has happened, and I think I'd tackle it in this way, or maybe this could happen if I did it that way. And like, what do you think? You know, you've got that person to bounce off of, that person to offer guidance. And I think that's really crucial. You know, even people, I don't have time to sort of mentor someone at the moment, but that's why Fastening Technical and these online Facebook groups and things are really good for this, because it's good to sort of have a bit of a buddy or a mentor to sort of help. The only thing with those forums is that you can sort of get inundated with too much help or too much information in all different directions that it just gets muddy and cloudy. And that's often why I won't comment on them, because mine's just another opinion of what works for me. Everyone's got different things that works for them, and you sort of need to find a mentor or someone to teach you their way perhaps, and just stick with that one way and then work out the rest on your own with your own analytical skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, here's one to kind of branch off that. Do you facet these quirky shapes for yield or scintillation, or both? And while you're answering that, I'm just going to pop up a couple more photos that we didn't see yet. But you don't have
Sure.
You don't have to directly address these ones, but I thought this was a good one to look at while we're answering that question.
That was a fun one. That was another really popular one. I don't necessarily do it for scintillation. I mean, I try and get the right angles so they've got good life to them. And I don't necessarily do it. I don't start them and set out to think about their yield. A good advantage of them, and that's a good reason for doing it. But I just like the creative challenge of looking at a piece of rough. It's like looking into the clouds and going, I see a hippo today, or I see a giraffe, or I see a ship, or, you know, I look at the shape and go, what kind of outline shape do I see? And then once I've cut that outline shape, and this is a good one to show, I guess, because you can see it's fairly similar. And again, guided by, you know, that pointed end on the left-hand side, it was guided by how shallow the piece of rough was on the underside too. So again, you're only seeing it face up. You're not seeing what the pavilion on this could look like on the rough piece of sapphire. This had some inclusions in, which I had to obviously cut around and things like that too. But you know, once I've got that outline shape, I then decide if I'm going to step cut it, if I'm going to, you know, sort of do a brilliant cut kind of thing. So, I mean, and they get good yield. This was one I did happen to weigh before and after. Mm-hmm. And this one had like a 41% yield, which is really, really good. Typically, you'd sort of get, you know, if you can get between like 25 to 35% yield, that's pretty standard and pretty good to get proper angles and things like that. You know, you might see native cut stones like emeralds and things overseas that get a better yield than that, but they're very dumpy on the pavilion. They might be really flat on the top, and they have cut those specifically for yield. But they might not scintillate and might not sparkle so much. But yeah, typically between sort of 25 to 35% yield on a lot of these stones, that, except the one that's on the screen right now, they're probably still getting around 30 to 35% yield. Again, I haven't weighed them before I started, but that's, once you take out those huge angles underneath and you cut it to a keel or a keel out point, you don't realize how much weight you're actually losing. So, you know, if I was to cut some of these shapes to a round, it wastes a lot more weight.
Yeah. And do you ever intentionally, or not intentionally, but do you ever sacrifice some weight, like to make a more symmetrical shape? Like for instance, here you kept this corner square where you could have flattened it out to match this one, but you didn't. But sometimes would you, just for your own aesthetic?
Yeah. Do you know what? It's funny you mentioned on that one, because partway through cutting, I did think of that. I was like, oh, that would have been really cool to actually have it match. But for me to go back and correct it, I would have lost more length and size and weight and things like that. So on that one, I didn't, because I knew I was doing it for a Transformation Tuesday and I'd taken a before and after shot. But yeah, definitely. Sometimes if I don't always like asymmetrical stones like this personally. But yeah, so sometimes I do like to cut symmetrical shapes, and I will sacrifice weight, definitely. Like I don't cut every stone to sort of match their rough, but I do loosely work off the shape though.
Yeah. Okay, let me just see if there's any more that there's still a lot of questions open, but I'm not gonna go through all of them because some of them it'll take another hour. But um, here's one that's directly about Australia, so that one's pretty good. Somebody had said, talking about the gem clubs in Australia that have some gemology workshops. I guess this isn't even a question. They're just saying, when we were talking about, do you need to know gemology? And they're saying some of the clubs
Mhm.
in Australia are teaching this, or they're talking about this. So yeah,
Okay,
that
that's
wasn't.
good. I didn't know that, and I guess it depends on where you're located. I mean, as I said, Queensland. I'm not very familiar with Queensland and their scene up there, but Queensland has a lot of cutters. They're close to the mines. They have a fasteners guild up there too, which isn't really a thing in South Australia. We don't really have a chapter, and it's not something I've engaged in. But yeah, there probably are more organisations and things like that. Maybe up in Queensland, New South Wales possibly has a lot more of it as well. Anywhere where there's stones mined, there is probably more of a importance of it around those sort of areas. But certainly in South Australia, there isn't really, I guess.
Yeah. Going back to the rose cut conversation, is there any special angles since the bottom's flat? We don't really have to worry about refractive index. You're just building whatever you want, right? You don't have to use any special angles for the rose cut.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I sort of have my favorite angles that I work with or I sort of base it off of. I think as long as your top angle isn't too steep and pointy, because it's not going to look good and it's not going to be as suitable for jewelry. You want that top angle to be a bit more softer, a bit more shallow. But yeah, I guess that's another thing to point out is they've got a flat base. The refraction is very different in a rose cut. So when people want a party cut rose cut, a party colored rose cut, it doesn't really work that way because light's bouncing in from the top and it's just going out the bottom because it's got a flat base. So it doesn't blend these party colors. You're still going to see these color patches because it's windowed essentially. It's shallow. There's no angles on the pavilion for it to bounce back off of and come back up to your eye.
Yeah. And so once those are done, I mean, this might be outside of your scope, but like once they're done, what's the best way that jewelers are using them? Like in rings or necklaces or what for the rose cuts?
Everything, I guess. Like there's no limit to them. They've still got a girdle like any other stone. They've got a flat base. You could set them in a bezel. You could set them claw set with sort of a piece of someone's lost audio.
I don't know.
Anyway, you could set them with like a flat base of metal with claws and things. Someone recently told me a jeweler that I recently sold some stones to. They said they're from the UK and they called them, I don't know if you've heard of this, Justin. They called them cabochon cut or like flat cabochons or something like that for rose cuts.
No.
And I said, well, that for me and what I've been taught, a cabochon is domed because it comes from the word like doorknob. French word for doorknob is on cabochon or something. And so it should be domed, whereas a faceted stone obviously has flat angles and meet points. So to me, a rose cut is a faceted stone with meet points. And she said they call it a cabochon because it's got a flat base. So they set them like cabochons, which
interesting. I never heard
something
that.
I hadn't learned about the UK, that's what they call them.
Yeah, maybe. The UK has a lot of really specifically different words. I know even the cutters that I met, they have like such different terminology for everything. Like instead of dopping, they say sticking up. Instead of scoring the lap, they say hacking the lap. So I don't know. They have a lot of their own colloquial terms, I guess. So
Yeah.
who knows? Okay, so this will be my last question for you. This is coming from Cliff. What is your favorite gem to facet?
My favorite gem to facet, look, I've got two, and I don't know if they're necessarily my favorite to facet or just because I like them as a finished stone, which to me is sort of the same thing. I like working with sapphires. I personally like Aussie sapphires and party sapphires a lot. They take a bit longer to cut because they take more stages because they've got a greater hardness. But I like sapphires because you never know color-wise how they're going to look, and they look quite, sort of sharp with the facets and the color and things. And also, I like Zircon. I actually really, really like Zircon. I think that they're underrated as a stone, as a gem.
Yeah.
They're really nice and easy to cut. They're probably a good beginner stone for people as well. And they've got really good doubling. Like they're just fun when they're cut as well. They've got really nice doubling. They've got really good brilliance, really good luster, similar to diamond. Yeah, I personally, they're probably my two favorite stones to
Yeah.
cut and to work with.
And it's kind of interesting, maybe both of those stones are like some of the higher RI stones that we work with in the jewelry trade that are not synthetic. So you can actually have a pretty good yield, versus like cutting an aqua or a quartz where you have to have a pretty thick stone to get all the angles
Mm,
right. Sapphire and zircon especially can have a super scintillated stone without having to
yeah,
have a super deep bottom. So
yeah,
that's also, I think, good for beginners where you kind of can get into the habit of having good proportions, as opposed to like if you always cut quartz, you're going to have an idea in your mind that stones have to be much deeper than what they really
yeah,
should be for jewelry and stuff. So yeah, okay.
yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we didn't say, anything that you want to throw out there to the world while we have this moment too?
I don't think so. I think we've covered some really good topics, actually.
Yeah,
We've
we said a
thrown
lot.
some good information out there for people.
If we wanted to go for another hour, I'm sure that I still have more things to ask, but maybe for another day. And for anybody who hasn't seen this already, Laura and I have a video on YouTube with our friend Mary that we did in Tucson. And it's three cutters. The idea was one on a handpiece, one on a jam peg, one on a mast. So if you guys haven't seen that, I'll probably throw that up on social media maybe tomorrow or something, just to remind everyone. That was a cool video that we did with
Mm,
Asia Lounges, where we said pretty much a lot of different stuff than we said today. I didn't think there was very much crossover. So that's a good hour if you want to get deeper into nerdy gem cutting stuff. That one was pretty cool. So yeah, thank you, Laura, for your time. It's been awesome to be able to pick your brain a little bit and see, your machine and see inside of your new studio a little bit and your whole
yeah,
business process. It's been awesome. So thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Let me
Having me.
I'll throw up this last screen. So if people want to find us online, if they're not already, I've got Laura's website, her Instagram, her Facebook, and my stuff as well. And if you want to know more about the school that's kind of promoting these talks in Bangkok, then we've got our social media on there. So yeah, everybody should go out and follow Laura. She's probably the number one gem cutter social media wise in Australia. Well, I'm sure that you are. I know that you are. But even in the world, you're like getting pretty far up there. So maybe we can uh,
Thank you.
push you even higher. And so, yeah, we're going to be back here next week. I'm going to be talking to Billy Hughes from Lotus and Victoria Reno. We're going to be talking about laboratories and lapidaries and the overlap, specifically talking about origin determination and how do gem cutters and laboratories work together to do some of this stuff. So we're going to be kind of continuing on this idea of gemology and gem cutting. And also we're going to continue on the Australian theme this Wednesday. If you guys aren't aware of this new series that I have with Vincent Pardue, which is field gemology talks. Wednesday, we're going to be talking more about Australian sapphires. So this is a whole story that I actually don't even know yet that I'm looking forward to hearing on Wednesday. So yeah, check out whatever social media. We're posting ads. But yeah, thank you again, Laura. It's been awesome. And good luck with all the cutting. I know maybe I'm going to do some more work today. So maybe you are too. I don't know. It's still early. So
No, I did some cutting yesterday, so I'm gonna take today off.
cool. Well, we'll catch you around. Hopefully we'll catch you in Tucson if, hopefully everything's going well next year. And of course, stay safe in Australia. I think you guys are starting to open back up slowly the same way we are here in Bangkok. So yeah, hopefully the
Yeah,
world is slowly starting to go back to somewhat normality. So we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, thanks again. And thanks to all of our guests for sticking it out. And if you didn't meet us or if you didn't make it to the end, this is going to be up on YouTube in a day or two. So you guys can go back and remember what we were nerding out about. So, okay. Well, catch you later, Laura, and we'll see you on Instagram for sure.
Thanks, Justin. See ya.
See ya. And see you, everybody.